Good morning, Chairman. We are now live.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Environment and Economy Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Ian Carrington, and I'm the chairman for this committee. Councillor Martin Griggs, vice chairman, is also present. Can I remind you that audio-visual feed of this formal public meeting is being broadcast live via the County Council's website, and with this in mind, I would like to welcome members of the public watching this live. I'd also like to begin with a health and safety announcement. Excuse me. There's no fire drill planned for this morning. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, we need to leave the council chamber through the rear doors, that's at that end of the building, and proceed into the front car park, where we will wait for further instructions. Can I also remind everyone to do what I have so far forgotten to do, which is to turn their mobiles, laptops and iPad to silent and keep them there for the duration of the meeting. And may I remind you that the hearing loop is also activated for those who may need it. Requests to speak will be collated by the Vice Chairman. When invited to speak, you should press the button on your microphone unit to make it live, then press again when you finish your contribution. We will now move on to the formal agenda. So, Jess, have we received any apologies for absence or filling of casual vacancies?
Thank you. We have not received any apologies today.
Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of members' interests? I'm seeing no hands raised. Good morning. If it does become apparent to you in the course of the meeting that you do have an interest to declare, simply raise your hand and we can take that at that point. So moving on to item 3, we have the minutes of the meeting of the committee held on Tuesday the 17th of January 2023. This item is to approve and sign the minutes of the last meeting as a correct record. Please turn to page 17 to 14 of your agenda pack for those minutes. So, do I have a proposer? Thank you very much. Councillor Fleetwood, and a seconder. Councillor Taylor. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Excellent. So those are agreed, and I will sign those at the end of the meeting. Item 4, announcements by the chairman, executive councillors and lead officers. From my own point of view as chairman, I would simply say that we have a particularly heavy agenda today, including one pre-decision item to be considered. I would therefore like to remind officers presenting that reports should be taken as read. You're welcome to summarise just the key points and what is asked by the committee before initiating debate on each item. And could I ask all members to remember the importance of being succinct and concise in your contributions. I would like to note that in relation to item 9, which is the local electric vehicle infrastructure pilot, for that item we are being joined by members of the Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee remotely, who've been invited to take part in the debate for this item only, as the thematic area is pertinent to their remit. And to clarify, this item is being taken as part of our agenda in line with the economic element of the funding that the County Council has been awarded for this pilot. Now, we'll hear more of that during the presentation, and with this I'd like to welcome members of the Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee attending this session. Because we have such a long and heavy agenda, we will take a comfort break about halfway through that agenda. So, moving on to Executive Councillor announcements. Are there any announcements from executive members? Shall we start with Councillor Colin Davey, Executive Councillor for Economic Development, Environment and Planning, or indeed his supporting councillor who's with us in the chamber, Councillor Dyer?
Thank you very much, Chairman.
Good morning, Councillor Davey.
Thank you, and good morning to all the committee members. In line with your recommendation to keep things succinct, I shall keep my announcements short this morning. So I'm pleased to join you today and see you have a very, very busy agenda. A number of themes will run through your discussions this morning, not least how we continue to strive for sustainable growth across the whole of Lincolnshire. We recognise the need for strong infrastructure to enable our businesses and communities to flourish, but also recognise the value of Lincolnshire's landscape and land use. I know that Scrutiny Panel B, who have been looking at agricultural sector support, have added their voice to those pressing government to recognise the need to value food production in decisions relating to land use. I'm pleased to hear that DEFRA will shortly publish a framework for land use across the UK. The panel's scope has been wide-ranging, and another key theme has been the importance of encouraging young people to see farming and food production as a good career with huge variety, and the very practical to the highly technical robotics work being developed here in the county. Next week is Careers Week, and we'll be launching a number of videos that showcase people working in the sector. While thinking of inspiring people on the career journey, apprentices are the future lifeblood of our economy, and we are passionate about supporting them. Following the successful launch in 2022, the Apprenticeship Champion Awards are back for 23, and applications for nominations are now open. The theme this year is around how apprenticeships can help to build skills for life, and we are seeking nominations in 3 areas: the Apprentice Champion, Apprentice Employer Champion, and Apprentice Training Provider Champion. The deadline for entries is Friday the 10th of March 2023. Please promote this across all your networks. You will recall that our Made Smarter East Midlands programme was developed to boost the growth, productivity and competitiveness of the region's manufacturers through the adoption of digital technologies. I'm pleased to share with you all that it has been successfully launched by the County Council on behalf of the East Midlands Growth Hub Cluster. It has attracted unprecedented levels of interest from SME manufacturers in Lincolnshire, Leicestershire, Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire. Since the programme opened in mid-December, there have been more than 200 company registrations and over 50 companies have started to receive support from the programme. The appetite of SME manufacturers to adopt digital technology has surpassed our anticipated demand, and we look forward to supporting hundreds of our region's manufacturers with a comprehensive package of support. And finally, a date for your diaries. Business Lincolnshire will be holding their flagship Go Digital Customer of the Future conference at Bishop Gurtess University on the 8th of March. To date, we have over 100 people booked to attend the event I will be speaking at. This fully funded event will focus on understanding the digital trends shaping tomorrow's customers and what your businesses can do about it today. I'll leave it there, Chairman. I'm happy to pick up any questions from members of the committee, but recognising the lengthy agenda, you'll probably want to keep those questions short.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Davey. And can I just say, before we do move to questions, how particularly pleased I was about the item there on apprentices. This council plays a leadership role as far as apprentices is concerned. They are quite literally the future of the workforce, and the apprentice programme doesn't just improve the workforce, it improves the life chances of everybody who takes part in it. Extremely important thing. I'm looking around the room. Does anybody have a question which they wish to put to Councillor Davey? I'm not seeing any hands going up. Councillor Dyer, you're here as Councillor Davies number 2. Do you have any points you wish to add? We also have present in the chamber Councillor McNally, another executive board member. Anything to comment, or you'll wait? No. Good. In that case, thank you very much, Councillor Davey. Thank you all executive members for your attendance. And we will now move on to senior officers. Are there any announcements from lead officers, who would include Justin Brown, Assistant Director of Places, Nicole Hilton, Assistant Director of Communities, Chris Miller, Head of Environment, Samantha Harrison, Head of Economic Development, and Mike Reid, Head of Waste, and frankly anybody else who's here who would wish to speak. I'm encouragingly seeing a shaking of heads, and with a very full agenda, I thank you for that. We will therefore move on to agenda item number 5, Local Nature Recovery Strategy, a Partnership Approach. This pre-decision executive scrutiny report is on pages 15 to 22 of the agenda pack. The paper describes the role of the responsible authority and proposes that, in exercise of that role, the LNRS, Lincolnshire Nature Recovery Strategy, is produced through collaborative partnership working and governance. And the actions which are before us, the committee is invited to scrutinise the recommendations that are set out on pages 15 and 16 of the report and make comments which will be reported to the executive at its meeting on 7th March, and to determine whether the committee supports these recommendations and the views of the committee obviously will be shared with the executive. So the report will be introduced by Chris Miller, Head of Environment. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, councillors. And in the spirit of brevity, I will take the report as read, but just highlight some key points out of it. So you'll recall back in the winter of last year, we brought the Environment Act to this committee for review, and you'll note that there was a number of elements of that that hadn't actually been brought into play. Part of that was the local nature recovery strategies. And whilst we still don't have all the recommendations and regulations that we're required to work to from government, we have been given a steer as to how we are expected to progress. And that's what the report is seeking to cover. So the Environment Act introduced three key parts for nature. The 10% biodiversity net gain on all developments, the duty to enhance and report on biodiversity and our existing duty to conserve that, and also then the provision of the local nature recovery strategies to guide how that will be implemented. These will be a system of spatial strategies and will establish the priorities and proposals for actions to drive nature's recovery and the wider environmental benefits. They will agree priorities for nature's recovery, map the most valuable existing areas for nature, and map specific proposals for creating or improving habitat for nature and wider environmental goals. You can see I've read that bit. Each of the strategy areas are quite wide. There's 48 across the whole of England with an appointed responsible authority. For our area, we're going to be looking at the Greater Lincolnshire area, so ourselves and the other two Tier 1 authority areas. And Lincolnshire County Council has been selected as, or will be being selected as, the responsible authority. That's not been nailed down in stone yet, but that's the direction of travel. The expectation for delivery of it, as we've discussed previously, will be driven through partnership working. So that's looking at a partnership between the three-tier authorities, the Greater Lincolnshire Nature Partnership, who help with our environmental records work and will be doing a lot of the work to deliver the strategy with our overview, and also colleagues from Natural England. In terms of the resources for this, the government have already provided us with a certain amount of seed funding to help us start to deliver against those targets, and we will be expecting some more in the next financial year. So we're very hopeful that obviously that will cover our increasing costs, and hopefully there'll be more to come in that regard. In terms of the next steps, as you'll have seen from the report, we're looking at the scoping for that governance arrangements, which is in Appendix A, which is the how we're going to look to how to deliver this, who's going to be involved, what work and task groups will be involved in doing so, and making sure that we deliver this appropriately and on time and in the best possible fashion we can. As I say, we are still due some regulations still to come out of government. When we know more about those, we'll hopefully just be able to deliver quickly against them, because we will have set ourselves up in an appropriate fashion. And so for the recommendations given in the paper, thank you, Chairman, that's the report.
Thank you very much indeed. We will move to questions. Councillor Baxter, start us off this morning.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for being slightly late. Obviously I welcome this. I'm sure we're all in favour of flowers and flora and little furry animals and so on. What I'm interested in is how it's measured, because I've got, at my end of the county, I've got a potential solar scheme which the presenters of a scheme say there will be a biodiversity net gain, and there are some cynics, it has to be said, and I'm sure that's true of a lot of the projects across the county, including the geological waste disposal facility up the other end of the county. How will it be measured, and what's the sanction if somebody doesn't produce? I mean, are we going around counting the clovers and the squirrels and the deer, or before and after? And if it doesn't happen, what can we do to put it right?
Chris, I'm sure you'll be counting the squirrels personally, but over to you for the answer.
Not quite so much. I'm actually going to pass over to our Senior Natural Environment Officer, Kate Percival, who's sat adjacent to me, to answer that question. Thank you, Chairman.
Hello. That's to do with biodiversity net gain, and the local nature recovery strategy will help guide that. there is a metric, sorry. So any development, you have to calculate what the biodiversity value is at the start. When that development takes place, then there needs to be 10% gain. Ideally, that will be on site, but it won't always be achievable, so then it needs to be off site. We are looking at the moment with the Green Infrastructure Greater Lincolnshire, with Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust, at how that can work. So it's up to, we're looking to put a registry together of landowners who want to enter their land into that, and then developers who want to buy the credits. And it's up to the landowner to state their price, and then it's up to the developer to see whether they want to be involved in that. But there will be, we haven't got all the guidance yet, but there will be, we'll have to monitor that. It'll be for a 30-year period. So you'll be taking your land out of production or whatever for 30 years. So that has to be sort of included in the cost of it. It'll have to be monitored, and then there'll be enforcement if that doesn't take place. But we haven't got all the details yet. We're just looking at how it can work for Lincolnshire.
Councillor Baxter.
Thank you. I'm pleased that there are systems in place, and there's monitoring and measurement and so on. But I still don't understand what you're doing. I don't understand. Is it yards of hedgerow, or is it the squares of how do you measure biodiversity? How would you measure an arable field against a woodland? And before and after, I don't get it still.
There is a calculator for that, and that's not set by us, that's the national calculator. I think we're on metric 3 at the moment, whether that changes in time. But you're looking at the value of the land, and then you're looking at linear features as well, waterways and hedgerows. And they'll all have a value, a biodiversity value.
I'm going to come in here myself, if I may, because my question also related to biodiversity net gain. It seems to me that the framework which you've set out in this document is a very laudable one, it's a very comprehensive one, and it is based on strategy, and it is based on a plan. As far as the kind of biodiversity net gain which will be generated through the planning system, which will of course be administered through the LPAs, not through the 3 upper tier authorities, as far as that's concerned, it will really be on a case-by-case basis, and it will be very much dependent on which developments come forward and how well they deliver both on-site and off-site. So are we saying, A, that this is a framework for that, and B, I'm slightly struggling to understand how this very strategically driven framework that we've got before us will fit into the inevitably ad hoc way in which BNG will be delivered by developers as developments come up.
This will guide the biodiversity net gain. So this document will say which are our best sort of habitats, best places for wildlife, where there's opportunities for biodiversity net gain, and it'll help to ensure that it's appropriate net gain. So you get the right habitat in the right place.
Thank you for that. I think all of us, and I should declare an interest in a sense, just for transparency, that I have a professional involvement in planning, although in public service, and I've had the opportunity of taking a crack before the regulations come in, following metric 3, at doing BNG on a real development, which did have an arable field that was just growing cereal crops. And it was monitored by Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust, who gave us a big pat on the back when we made 5.6%. The magical figure of 10% concerns me. So my final question is, when you look at that metric which is baked in, delivery of 10%, how realistic do you think on-site provision is for example, a housing, or even more challengingly, a new industrial unit?
I think in some situations we won't get the 10%. That's the on-site, but then we'll have to do some that's off-site. Some authorities are going for 20% and 25%. 10% is the mandatory minimum.
Indeed. Thank you for that. Do we have any further members who wish to ask questions? Well, you're getting away slightly lightly there, I think. I think it's fair to say that we will learn a great deal more when the detailed statutory instruments are published. And we will learn more about the mechanisms of this. I think there are clear benefits to the whole programme, and I commend the framework that you're putting forward. But I think some of us who are professionally involved do have concerns about the deliverability of this in the long term. And also, of course, if we are using areas of the countryside, are we then taking valuable agricultural land out of production in order to provide BNG? And that is another concern which is very topical in this council at the moment. However, thank you for that. Seeing no further questions coming from the floor, we will move on. We do have a proposal before us, and I will move it. I move that the committee supports the recommendations set out on page 15 of the report and endorse the progress of the local nature recovery strategy through a partnership approach. I also move that comments from today's debate are shared with the executive ahead of their consideration of the item on 7th of March, and those comments have, of course, been captured. So we'll now move to the vote. All those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. Any abstentions? Any against? That is clearly agreed. Thank you very much indeed for your contributions on that item. We now move forward to item 6, which is in many ways related to item 5, Planning Reform and Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill. This scrutiny report is on pages 23 to 34 of the agenda pack, and the committee is invited to consider a report which provides a summary of proposed changes to the National Planning Policy Framework, the NPPF, and the planning system contained in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, and the likely implications for Lincolnshire. Excuse me. And the actions before us, the committee is invited to consider and comment on the contents of the report. And Phil Hughes is with us. This is the second iteration of a document that almost made it onto the agenda at the back end of last year. There were then further changes in central government, and this is kind of take two, and it's finally got to the agenda. The version that the public did not see was an excellent document, and so is this one. Phil, over to you to present it to us.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, councillors. The Chairman's absolutely right. This was quite a tricky report to write because it was at times difficult to keep up with the vicissitudes happening in central government and the policy changes arising from that. I'll take the report as being read. It's quite a long report, and some of it is quite technical and detailed, but I think it is largely relevant to what Lincolnshire wants to achieve in the future. I would concentrate on probably four main areas. That would be the infrastructure levy, section 106, housing targets and onshore wind, because I think all of those are of relevance to Lincolnshire and have created quite a lot of interest, certainly amongst our own councillors and also the local population. So the infrastructure levy seeks to replace the community infrastructure levy. It's a more streamlined approach. But there are problems with it, and I would outline those basically in terms of its mandatory nature. Previously, it was discretionary, and it's noticeable that some of our lower land value authorities, such as East Lindsey, Boston and South Holland, did not choose to adopt SIL, and there was a good reason for that, because it was thought to act as a disincentive to investment and development. If the government is going to make this mandatory, and it also proves that the exercise of going through the infrastructure levy analysis proves that the IL would be unviable, then we would need central support in terms of funding for infrastructure, but we don't know what that mechanism would be. And I think that's a clear deficit, and it's a clear issue that needs resolving. The other thing is that there's still no role for upper tier authorities such as Lincolnshire County Council, who actually deliver, I would say, most of the strategic infrastructure that the levy's intending to provide through its revenue, such as schools, roads, flood alleviation, that sort of thing. This needs to be dealt with probably not through a paper like this, obviously, but through possibly lobbying, so that the bill itself at some point could be amended, because I still think it's a a deficiency, and it puts us on the back foot in terms of trying to coordinate spending with revenue, and I think that's a big problem. One thing that has remained, and this did surprise a lot of people, is that 106, I think its demise has been prematurely stated. It's still alive and kicking, but in a more targeted fashion. So it will be used primarily for on-site infrastructure such as flood risk mitigation, and it will be confined largely to the larger sites where it's considered to make more of a difference. It will also continue to deliver affordable housing, which is crucial. I think one of the problems is that we're likely to be running two parallel systems for quite some while, the existing SIL 106 regime, but also the proposed change, which I think will be gradually phased in over several years. Now, this is a recipe for potential confusion, I think, unless the transitional arrangements are clearly spelled out by government, so that there's no problem in terms of establishing what's relevant at the time and which powers can be used at the time. Moving on to the NPPF, there were a number of changes were proposed in a recent consultation document, and this arose largely out of amendments to the bill itself. I mean, two of the ones that I think are of most concern to us are housing supply. The government has listened, I would say, to a lot of its backbenchers who represent Shire authorities in the southeast of England, where the pressure for development is considered to be intense and where there's a lot of greenbelt land. This change gives those local authorities the discretion not to meet their objectively assessed housing need, which is fine in itself. However, the government still wants to promote its 300,000 housing target annually. That seems to me ostensibly to be fairly inconsistent and possibly incompatible. And some of the national house builders are saying this will reduce housing supply by possibly 20 to 40%. There's already commentary around saying that we will have a reduced housing supply which hasn't been seen since the end of the Second World War, which quite frankly is a frightening prospect given the national housing crisis that we've got. On the other hand, this possibly creates an opportunity for those authorities outside the southeast where the overheating occurs, possibly authorities within Lincolnshire itself, where we could go for growth, in inverted commas, but we would need some sort of established and approved methodology for doing that when it comes to assessing growth and housing. That is not yet available, that's not on the table, and it's something that the government needs to provide if growth-hungry authorities want to promote their local plans and get them through the examination in public and supported by inspectors. I think finally, the last issue I would mention is the quite controversial one of onshore wind. A lot of discussion has been included in the press saying that this is going to be made more permissive and easier for developers to get their schemes through. Judging by what's in the NPPF, I don't actually see that. I don't see much in there which acts as an incentive for developers to come forward with schemes. The idea of achieving or measuring public support for this type of development simply isn't in the proposed revisions. We need a clearer statement of metrics, or it's just simple things like what constitutes a support or objection. Is it a number of letters? Is it petitions? Is it referendums? We need that more clearly established so that developers, local authorities and local communities know where they're at and how they can navigate the system. I think I'll leave it there because, as I say, it is a long document. It's quite a difficult document, but I'll be happy to try and answer some questions.
Thank you very much. I'm tempted to leap in straight myself, but I'm looking around the room to see if hands are going up. And we have the Chairman of Planning with us this morning, Councillor Fleetwood. Why don't you start us off?
Of course, I'm not here as Chairman of Planning. I'm here as a member of the committee today. However, we talk in terms of onshore wind, and I know that Lincolnshire is a big open place, and yes, we do have sweeping horizons and big skies which might lend itself towards wind technology. but we also need to think in terms of what we contribute to the national basket too. And if you take into account the amount of solar developments we see coming across Lincolnshire, I think that as far as the national pot's concerned, if indeed central government decide to award some of these solar projects, we will be giving to the UK a lot more renewable energy than any other location. At the weekend I did note that there were transformers going around the Lincoln Eastern bypass down towards Boston to allow for the additional electricity to be brought on land. And I do wonder quite how much we actually need to take forwards. We've seen some wind technology in the county, but I think that we really are contributing enough from that side. Moving on to the housing strategies, it's great that there's the concept that we have lots more contributions towards housing, but if you look in terms of local villages and local settlements, you need to take into account that we have Victorian sewage systems, or worse, in a lot of locations. So it's all very well building additional properties, but any levy of infrastructure must be guided towards improving the local communities, albeit sewage, albeit the roads, and indeed if we're going to have this level of connectivity, to go forward planning and look towards, dare I suggest it, a tram system working around the area in the Lincoln travel to work area, so that you could take off an awful lot of cars off the road network. Just a few of my thoughts anyway.
Thank you very much. Any of those that you wish to come back on, Phil?
No, there's some good points there. Infrastructure is a tricky one, especially in this part of the world, because obviously it comes out of the land value ultimately, and we suffer from that. I still think there's an argument to be had, there's a case to be made for setting up a central fund with a mechanism which allows low value areas such as ours to take a part of the cake and assist development, because I think we do have the opportunity to make a contribution to the national economy in terms of our growth potential, and I don't think that will be realised until we receive central government support.
Thank you for that. Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome this report, and for some clarity over what is happening at a national level. I welcome the vocabulary, particularly I think you said vicissitudes. Said it better than I did, and oligopolistic is in there in the report, and so it's a cerebral challenge from my point of view. But also I welcome the understatement of recent turbulence in government ministerial appointments. And it's caused me to have a look. I see that we've had 9 different secretaries of state since 2015. So it is difficult to forecast what's going on with this. However, my first question is, do we think it will happen? I'm not going to put you on the spot and say, is it going to happen, Mr. Hughes? But as a council, do we believe that this is going to happen? And if it is, when is it going to happen? When is it going to kick in? Is it going to be like the Environment Act, where it's passed and then we don't hear anything about the implementation or the funding for years after? If it is passed before the next general election, is it election-proof? Is it whichever government picks up after the next general election, are they going to leave it alone if it's done? Will it solve the issues of NIMBYism? Because, yeah, it is difficult to find a place to put either a large solar farm or onshore wind or a geological disposal facility. It's difficult to find communities, no matter what the incentives you offer, it's difficult to find people that want these things. But at the same time, we do have a massive challenge of climate change that's going to affect us all. We have a massive challenge of house building, which is affecting us all, and we have massive problems of energy security. So climate change, housing and energy security are enough that, regardless of political party, we all have to crack. We all need to crack. But is this going to do it? And if so, when?
Over to you.
Thank you. Well, first of all, nothing's election-proof. It could change. The Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill itself was subject to last-minute amendments which weren't expected, and this is what's generated changes to national planning policy. The policy itself, the deadline is, I think it's Thursday, isn't it, this week, so we will make a formal representation signed off by our Executive Councillor. It should be stated, and I think I did mention it in the paper, that this is only a partial first review of the NPPF, which is a bit concerning because we're just wondering how much change the planning system can take, if you like. It's been subject to never-ending change for the last 10, 15 years almost. So there will be more of this in the future, and we will report it back to you. But I think in terms of stability, I think the government, after all the changes that have occurred over the last 6 months or so, they want a stable platform for planning. They need that. Practitioners need that. Planning officers need that. And local councillors need that, so they know what they're about and what they can achieve.
Thank you. I'm going to bring us back to energy, and I'm going to bring us back in particular to wind. Your report highlights that there are, basically, the jury is kind of out still on wind. I noted and it's worth clarifying for members, and it relates to Councillor Baxter's question, that we really have two allied drivers here, don't we? We have the Levelling Up Bill, and we have changes to the NPPF, some of which I suspect would have happened anyway, and some of which are related to the Levelling Up Bill. I'm looking to officers to correct me if I'm wrong. And at least in this occasion, I think I'm right in saying, Phil, it's the first time that there's been a consultation on changes to the NPPF. But looking at the questions in the NPPF about wind, they don't seem to me to reflect the written ministerial statement, which we got in December, I think I'm right in saying. And we have this crucial question, which I think you were alluding to, where we're talking about local community support. There is not really any clarity on what the metric for evaluating that might be, who might evaluate it, and there doesn't seem to be a nod in the direction of a national standard. Now, technically, you could say it's the local planning committee, unless it's an NSIP, who would make that decision. Would you agree that this is an area where we need a very great deal more clarity if there is going to be a nationally level playing field, going back to Councillor Fleetwood's point, rather than everybody just making up effectively their own set of rules as they go along?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I mean, I would agree with that. I would recommend some sort of consistency and standard so that it becomes transparent and there's no trying to rig the outcome. I think there may be yet another additional consultation on how to consult on this particular matter, because it's always been slightly different from other types of development. Developers of onshore wind have been expected to engage in quite lengthy, time-consuming and expensive pre-application consultation with communities anyway. And I think at that point they realise whether they're going to get support or not, and quite often they back away when they realise they're not getting that support. But we do need more clarity. It's been going on for too long, really.
Yes, thank you very much for that. It does seem to me that, particularly in an area which A is one which arouses a great deal of passion on both sides of the argument, B is one which involves multiple tiers of local authority, ourselves as providers of strategic infrastructure, local planning authorities, so on and so forth, that we actually need serious clarity about how this goes forward. But I think on the internet we have Councillor Davey would like to come in at this point. Councillor Davey.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'm listening to this debate with a great deal of interest. As Phil Hughes has said, we are intending to put in our formal response to this later this week, and I am listening to the debate between members on this. I agree. I think this is an imperfect document by a long way. I think we've got some real challenges, and there are some real dangers for Lincolnshire if we don't encourage government to get this right. There is other stuff going on around what community benefit means. There was a paper last week from government which they intend to consult on. So I think that, you know, it's important that all the committee members who have concerns about this raise them now, so Phil can capture them, and the response I put into government later this week reflects the views of this committee's membership as widely as possible. Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, thank you very much for that. And I think one concern which might go down on that list, Phil, is the whole business of, and this is in a sense more to do with development beyond our technical remit, but we are a local authority and should comment, the imposition of, if it is an imposition of national development management policies. Now, historically, those have always been developed by local authorities. For us, it would be in regard to waste. For the LPA is pretty well everything else, but they have been locally generated. Now, it could be a good thing to have some commonality, but we do not yet know, as I understand it, what these are going to be, and therefore we can't make a qualitative judgment on them. And I'd love to hear your comment on street votes and how workable you think those are.
Well, regarding the National Development Management Policies, some have described that as a power grab, and that the reason by the Secretary of State, because he can, according to this, in the Levelling Up Bill, he can direct local plans or override local plans policies and implement a national view on this. I mean, we all know that national planning policy tends to be London-centric at the best of times, but the system has always allowed local plans and local authorities to deviate from national policy where there's a good reason, because not all areas are the same. They have different issues, different challenges and different opportunities, and that should be respected and promoted. I think this is an issue. Some lawyers think it's not, other QCs think it is, and I think I put quite a lengthy bit on about Paul Brown, who's a leading QC on planning. He thinks it's quite dangerous, and I tend to agree with him. In terms of street votes, I think you could call this populist, if you're being charitable, but I think it's a recipe for neighbour conflict, and I can't see what the point of it is, quite frankly. I mean, planning exists to mediate between competing interests, whether it's neighbours, developers, local authorities, or anybody else who's interested in the process. So I think it's a bad idea.
Yes, and there's always the risk that some actors involved in that will be better able to present arguments than others, and it will not, in fact, be the level playing field it appears. Just a final one that I would throw in before I go back to the room to see if we can conclude. And that is the business of agricultural land, which effectively we are being told we should take into account, which is fine. It's particularly germane. It's a very hot topic with these NSIP, very large solar farms at the moment. Is this, or is it not, taking agricultural land, which would be better use for food production? But we kind of already take it into account. Again, I'm not sensing a huge amount of clarity in how it should be taken account, what planning weight should be given to it. Am I missing something, or is this another area where perhaps we need additional clarity from central government?
It's an important issue, especially for agricultural areas like ourselves. I think the fact that it's the words that I've included, they're actually included in a footnote within the NPPF, which doesn't seem to give it the prominence and importance it deserves. I think what you could say is it can be used to direct, for example, solar farms away from best and most versatile agricultural land towards the grade 3B, 4 and 5s of this world. But in Lincolnshire, we've got so much good quality land that I think inevitably, for example, in South Holland and in Boston, we will be building still on grade 1 and grade 2 land when it comes to housing. I think because of the preponderance of it, I think there's no way out.
Thank you very much for that. I'm looking around the room to see if there are any further members who have not spoken. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think basically one of the main problems of housing supply is the structural problems within the building industry in itself. So when it's talking about oligopolistic, it's saying basically that the building industry is dominated by very few large firms. And what they do is they hold on, don't they, to a building programme until economic conditions are correct, and then they build. And one of the things that I think is completely wrong in the planning process is that often when plans are submitted, the developer says that they will add community benefit by building a shop or a school or whatever, and that comes at the end of the project, and then they've run out of money, so it never materialises. And what I think should happen is that should come first. So I completely agree with what's been said about street votes, because I think it's just going to, it's just another way of, I think, of creating conflict within a street. But I think there's something innately wrong with our planning process where we allow large building firms to actually fill their pockets with profit and add nothing to the community because they say they've run out of money, and it's wrong. So anyway, that's my contribution. I think it's too unregulated in the sense that the large firms are dominating the industry, and they're actually not building. And I think they are now, but they've not been building the right sorts of houses because obviously our population has changed. So we need small houses, and we also need, you know, more affordable housing for young people. And I mean, I don't know enough about the planning procedure, but just as a layperson, that's what I see happening. Thank you.
Phil, before you answer that, can I just ask you to pick up Councillor Kelly's comments, but also add two related things to them. First is it correct that the package of measures at least edges toward trying to bear down on what's been popularly called land banking, which is something which has not been satisfactorily addressed, perhaps? And secondly, the provisions on social housing. They're really beyond the remit, in a sense, of this council. I've studied them elsewhere, and I have some concerns over the lack of clarity in those. In addressing Councillor Kelly's point, I wonder whether you could bear both of those in mind.
Yeah, I think the government's sort of edging towards almost like a naming and shaming approach when it comes to slow build-out. But they're trying to instigate some measures, I don't know whether they'll be statutory or advisory, to try and increase the pace of development and accelerate development on sites which have stalled. I mean, this is old news. Oliver Letwin did quite a good report on this years ago, and he put forward some quite sensible, pragmatic measures to try and accelerate build-out. And part of that involved parcelling up some larger sites and giving them to small, medium builders who need them because they find it quite difficult to find the sites. What the councillor says, Councillor Kelly says, is absolutely right. After 2008 financial crash, a lot of our small builders were decimated. They were wiped out, and they never came back. And so we've experienced a period of consolidation within the building industry, and there's not as much competition or quality as there ought to be. I think we should remember that house builders have no legal or moral obligation to meet any housing target the government asks them to. It's purely advisory, it's discretionary. It's almost like a debating point at times, and that becomes quite frustrating.
Thank you very much. One last very brief point, please. Councillor Baxter again.
Thank you. Councillor Davies said that he would welcome comments from this committee before the council put their response in, so I'd like an opportunity to do that. But also, will we get a copy of what the council submits when it has been submitted later this week? Does this stuff change the NSI? Is it NSIP? NISP? The National Infrastructure Projects programme process. Does it affect that at all? One thing I would ask Councillor Davey to include within his response is future-proofing houses. At the moment, there's no obligation for house builders to make their houses sustainable in terms of putting solar or heat pumps or anything in. We were promised a decade ago that all houses would be built to net zero standards, or I can't remember what they called it, warm homes zero, and it hasn't happened. And the developers will continue to build them as cheaply as possible. It would be great if we could do something about that.
Thank you. Before you come back, I think just on that last point, do bear in mind, A, that certainly in part of Lincolnshire, the local plan is currently under review with the objective of addressing those in a very aggressive way. And secondly, we have two-stage changes to building regulations coming in 2023 and 2025, which will make a significant real progress on that front. But there's a package of things there. Phil, would you like to pick those up?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've just answered the question, Chairman. In terms of central Lincolnshire in particular, we are promoting a very ambitious set of policies which are really at the cutting edge, and I think we'll be doing quite well to get them through the examination in public, and with a bit of luck the inspector will support them. But they are heading towards net zero, which is what we need. In terms of the formal response to the NPPF consultation, I will of course circulate that to the committee.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any further hands go up. I think we've given this we've covered everything from wind farms to street votes and pretty well everything else in between. And so we should, because the planning system affects almost every aspect of our life, both in the work of this council and in the work of the local planning authority councils at district level. It's an incredibly important thing, and I would like to thank you again, Phil, for a very comprehensive report, picking the bones out of changes which are live and still ongoing and not fully complete. So you've been using your crystal ball as well as your analysis, and it's a very helpful report indeed. So, having had all those discussions, we have a proposal before us, which is, I move that the committee receives the report and request that our comments from today's debate as captured are shared with the leading officers and portfolio holders as needed, and of course that we get this council's formal reply appended to the papers of our next meeting. So we'll now take the vote. All those in favour of that proposal, please show. Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you very much. That is clearly carried, and thank you for your contributions to an excellent debate. We move on to item 7, the role of the local enterprise partnership and the relationship with Lincolnshire County Council following government guidance. This report can be found on pages 35 to 40 of the agenda pack and describes the relationship between Lincolnshire County Council and the Greater Lincolnshire Enterprise Partnership. The paper goes on to explain that the role of the LEPs is changing, with LEPs being given responsibility to update their economic strategy and with LEPs being expected to integrate into new arrangements should a county deal be agreed. Finally, the paper recommends that LCC continues to support the LEP, both by aligning our own economic priorities with those of the LEP and by continuing to use the business voice that the LEP can bring into the way that we inform and shape our own activity. And we have 2 actions before us. Members of the Environment and Economic Scrutiny Committee are invited to review, and 1, endorse the continuation of the approach in which LCC supports the LEP in its production of the economic strategy, seeking to align and avoid duplication wherever possible, and 2, encourage officers to continue to seek private sector input into priorities and initiatives by actively engaging with the LEP board and its subgroups. And the report will be presented by Justin Brown, Assistant Director Growth, who is, I think, in the chamber. Justin, over to you.
Yeah, Chairman, thank you, and good morning, everyone. So one of the other aspects in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill was...
sorry, Justin. Did you have a point you wish to make, Councillor?
Thank you, Chairman. Just to want to refer you to page 37, as my name is mentioned on that page. As you know, in May 2022, I suffered a stroke. Following that, I stood down as chairman of this committee, and therefore, whilst on the road to recovery, I request that I hand the baton to you as director of the LEP, as current chairman of this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wotton. I'm sure we can refer that request to the appropriate channels where it will be decided, not by me personally, but I'm sure we can look into that. And we do take this opportunity to thank you. We've already thanked you for your service in this chair, but also for your service in that ancillary body as well. Thank you very much indeed for that. Justin, back to you.
So, yeah, thank you, Chairman. So, yeah, Levelling Up Bill included guidelines around LEPs, which means it's worth us just taking a step back and thinking about and reasserting our role in terms of supporting the LEP. So, as members will remember, LEPs were formed in 2010. They're public-private partnerships with a leading role in terms of economic strategy and in the targeting of funding. And we took a strategic view back in 2010 to align between LEP and LCC rather than duplicate, rather than see any competition. Now, what that has led to is a very productive relationship, and a relationship which has helped us to be able to develop and inform policy, as well as to deliver a wide range of activity across Greater Lincolnshire. And there's a table which I think is on page 37, which sets out the things the County Council has been doing in economic development, and also in italics those that the LEP has done. And you will see a very clear synergy. And I would encourage members, and in fact my team members, to use that as a little bit of a ready reckoner in terms of where the various aspects of what we bring to the committee fit together. So in terms of LEP representation, as Councillor Wotton has explained, there is a LEP company which he currently sits on as former chairman of Environment and Economy, and we'll have a conversation outside of this meeting about future membership. Councillor Davey is on the board of directors, and the Chief Executive, Debbie Barnes, as the lead on the accountable body, is also on the board of directors. Now, in terms of what the government has proposed, they're looking at two big issues in terms of LEPs. The first one is asking LEPs to revisit their economic strategy. And one of the things we've found over the last decade is that the government, when it looks at economic strategy for an area, uses the LEP's economic strategy as its baseline. And therefore, we are very keen to continue to align our work with that of the LEP in terms of developing strategy. It feels as though we should share a strategy as opposed to have a county council one, a LEP one, etc. And then the second point that the government has created some guidelines around is that the work of LEPs would be subsumed into any combined authorities should a county deal go ahead. Now, obviously that is one issue. What I think is probably the more important issue for this committee is that Greater Lincolnshire LEP actively works with around 200 private businesses in its board and its various subgroups. And that gives us a real-time piece of information which informs a lot of our strategy and a lot of our activity. And it feels as though it's really important for us to retain that level of private sector input in order to help us to shape things. So in terms of summary and recommendations, it's certainly my recommendation is that we continue to align and that we recognise that economic strategy that is developed by the LEP is what is seen by the government as their baseline for economic strategy, and they're looking 10, 15, 20 years ahead in terms of economic strategy. And secondly, that we continue to support and use that private sector input that we receive from the LEP. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Justin. A very important area. So, looking around the room, Councillor Spratt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and can I thank Justin for the report. First of all, I think it's very important that he did say that the LEP and the County Council are running in alignment to avoid any duplication and such like. And I think the county council demonstrated, this county council particularly, during COVID, its management of the local economy, what it did in terms of intervention and such like. Does the officer think that if we get, and once we get, some form of devolved government, effective devolution, does he foresee the circumstances where LEPs will probably be abolished with all the powers given to local authorities? Because it seems to me, following COVID, that local authorities, particularly, as I said, the county council, are in a unique position to determine circumstances and how we react, not only to local circumstances, but also to national circumstances. But if we do get those devolved powers, as I'm suggesting and I know we want, why would we need the LEPs? Just, perhaps he can't speculate on that, but I'm inviting him to anyway.
Justin, you're invited.
Yeah, thank you very much, and yeah, please do call me Justin, not the officer. I think there's two things here. One is LEP as a team of people and a set of activities. And what we've seen with county deals elsewhere in the country is that the LEP team has indeed been backed into the combined authority. The second piece of LEP, which is probably the most important one, is that 200 or so businesses who are actively being involved in boards and in subgroups and sector groups. Because as you said, that valuable real-time piece of information is something that helps to inform decision making. And so it feels to me as though whatever happens in the architecture of officials and processes and so on, that ability to engage with the private sector properly and to listen to what they've got to say has got to be at the core of advising on the decisions that we take.
Hilton, did you want to come back on that?
I don't foresee the circumstances occurring like Councillor Baxter mentioned earlier on about this being election-proofed either.
Well, as we heard from Phil Hughes, in effect, every parliament is sovereign, so nothing can really be election-proofed because anybody coming in can undo what their predecessor did, and that's simply democracy. Whether it is always a wise exercise of power is a different matter, and there is a strong argument in favour of sensible continuity, but that's kind of the democratic system. I wanted to pick up, if I may, really generalise out of the point that you were making there about the private sector. 2 points. Firstly, it seems to me that all levels of local government, right down to parish councils, but particularly in our current structure, the county council and the second-tier authorities, have an enormous potential to facilitate private enterprise and to facilitate sustainable economic growth. Am I right in thinking that the LEP in our current shape of local government in this county is a key means of getting cooperation and avoiding duplication between bodies at different tiers of local government, but also including in that the private sector? Because ultimately, however active we are, it is the private sector which generates the wealth and provides the prosperity, which allows us, at whatever level of council we are, right down to parish, to do the social things that we need to do. And it is the LEP's role as a means of ensuring cooperation and coordination between the public sector and the private sector and different levels of each that I'm most concerned should be preserved.
In a word, yes. I think I've been doing some work with the Local Government Association on role of economic development and looking ahead at future skills needs and so on. And what is very, very clear is that there is a need for us in local government to balance the decision-making processes that we have constitutionally and democratically with that broad horizon of advice from private sector, from academia, from voluntary sector, etc. And certainly my experience over the last 13 years has been that the Greater Lincolnshire LEP has been able to bring us a level of private sector advice, input, knowledge, which has been extremely powerful, as you'll see in that table in the report, which shows the breadth of what we've been able to do as a result of their advice.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Bowles and then Councillor Baxter. Councillor Bowles.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I fully support the recommendations in the paper, particularly around, the continuation of the approach across the Greater Lincolnshire area, living where I do, being 20, 30 minutes from Scunthorpe, the vast majority of Gainsborough residents work in Scunthorpe, own businesses in Scunthorpe. So to have that joined up thinking across the boundaries, really it just makes sense, and it is the only way we should go and continue with it. Second, it's a question really, just some clarity, and again it's based on the sort of Gainsborough Scunthorpe thing. Obviously we read a lot, we've read in the papers about the cuts to the steelworks at Gainsborough. Hundreds of my residents are affected by that, and it's not necessarily, when you read hundreds of jobs being lost at the steelworks, it's not those, it's the smaller companies who provide the services, get their works from the steelworks. So it's those smaller companies who employ 15, 20 people who are really being affected. So when I read this about the LEP, it's very much about drawing in funding, increasing skills and all that kind of stuff. What is the role in the LEP in supporting those companies in those sort of situations where, like I say, hundreds of residents that I represent are fearful that they're forgot because they're not the steelworks, are not losing the jobs, but they are the ones who's going to lose the contracts in the next few months, year. So could just have some clarity about how they can support those businesses. That would be great.
Thank you. So James sitting there, who's the LEP's policy manager, may come in and augment this slightly. But certainly one of the things that the LEP is able to do is to monitor and provide information around economic trends. So when over the years there have been difficulties at the steelworks, the LEP has been doing a lot of work to actually analyse specifically who those businesses are, and for us to be able to start to develop some of the business support programs that they may need to grow. Business support programs often delivered by Samantha's team here. Where there is a major redundancy, then the government will often create what's called a task force. Sometimes that's with a capital T and a capital F if it's a certain number, otherwise a small t and a certain small f if it's below that number. And it looks to the LEP to bring a number of partners together in terms of addressing what the issues may be, both in terms of individuals, in terms of supply chain, and in terms of assets. So I see the LEP as playing quite a significant role academically in that exercise, but it's not about academic, it's about actually doing it, and certainly over the years the LEP has been an important player within that task force around the Scunthorpe Steelworks. I don't know, Chairman, if there's anything that James might want to add in terms of the specifics of the case.
James, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. And yes, I think Justin has basically summarised that perfectly from our perspective. In the particular case of Scunthorpe Steelworks, as has happened previously, there has been a group that stood up that incorporates government bodies, local authorities, and indeed the LEP. And as Justin has alluded to there, the LEP kind of joins together the intelligence that we understand from the business community, but then takes that into the kind of action and works to facilitate some of that through the network that we have already, working with partners. So it's very much a sort of connecting piece that we look to do in these circumstances, in partnership with national organisations like DWP, as well as sort of local organisations, to ensure that supply chains and the people involved can get the best possible outcome from what is a difficult situation.
Thank you. Councillor Bowles, do you want to come back on that? Is that reassuring? Good. Excellent. And Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chairman. I intend to abstain on this for a couple of reasons. First of all, I don't believe in Greater Lincolnshire. I don't think it's a good format to deliver services to or to residents. It's remote and unaccountable. But that's not a conversation that we can conclude today. So I'll move on to the second part of my problem with it. Is that the LEP is it's a useful body. It's doing some helpful work in various different ways. It's a collection of the great and the good, and if it didn't exist, then we'd probably have to invent something like it. But at the same time, it's a lot like the House of Lords. The House of Lords does a lot of good work, and you'd have to invent something like it if you were to abolish it. But both the LEP and the House of Lords are unelected, unaccountable. Most residents have no idea what they do or what they're for, and generally, I don't think that we should be conforming our. I'm not saying it's bad that we have, but in terms of the democratically elected body and the less democratic body, they should be aligning to us, not us to them, and they go across county borders and. Despite the good work and the good things that come out of it and the decisions that are made, in principle, I think that we should be ploughing our own furrow and not trying to fit in with the LEP.
Thank you for that. Justin, would you like to come back on any of that?
Yeah, Chairman, thank you. I think when I use the word alignment, I don't think of it as in one organisation aligning to another. It's very similar to the conversation you had about nature recovery at the first agenda item. It's actually about all organisations aligning with each other around the evidence that is required. And so when I talk about alignment, I'm certainly not thinking we align with LEP or LEP aligns with us. It's a symbiosis amongst a number of partners. I'm surprised Councillor Davey, as a LEP board member, hasn't made any comment yet, and I'm just looking at the IT to see if he's still around. One of the things I know Councillor Davey is quite keen to explore is around economic strategy and long-term vision. So
let's see if we can tempt him. Councillor
Yeah, thank you very much. I'd put my hand up, Chairman, so I was going to intervene. Firstly, I would just want to deal with Councillor Baxter's point, this idea that it's unaccountable. That's not the case at all. The LEP has an accountable body. The accountable body is the County Council. We give reports back to government on the spend by the LEP, and it is properly audited and checked by government. So all public money that the LEP has received has been properly accounted for by us, a democratically elected body. But moving on to the wider picture that Justin just touched on, I think it's very important that as we go forward, hopefully to a county deals arrangement with government, but if not, that we have a long-term vision for the Greater Lincolnshire area, and that includes on major infrastructure. So I think the committee would want to maybe receive back some thoughts about what Lincolnshire 2050 needs to have commissioned and have support from central government for, whether it's that's new roads, new business sites, connectivity issues. We need to have a proper discussion, I think, and this committee is the place for that. So maybe in one of your recommendations, Chairman, the committee might want to bring back a piece of work commissioned by the LEP and the County Council to look at the long-term vision for Greater Lincolnshire in terms of the infrastructure requirements for our place. So I'll leave it there, but I'm happy to drop in further thoughts as a LEP board member. I would say, however, and finally, that the LEP, I think, has worked spectacularly well for Greater Lincolnshire. That private sector leadership supported by the public sector, and there are representatives on the board. I represent the County Council. I'm a voting member. Craig Leyland, who's the leader of East Lindsey, represents the district councils. The leaders of North and North East Links also sit on the board. So there is a very strong democratic accountability in the LEP, and the LEP has always recognised the role of the public authorities in making sure delivery can happen at the pace. And they also recognise that we have the close relationship with government, and that usefulness, the private sector involvement, with the LEP, we would not be able to replicate ourselves. I mean, the private sector wants to not be in a political talking shop. This is about getting stuff done, and the LEP has got stuff done, and the record speaks for itself. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davey. Yeah, I mean, from my personal point of view, I have to say that the thought of all the different authorities and sitting in their own silos, not talking to each other, and local government not working hand in glove and not talking properly to the private sector is absolutely horrific. I think we have heard, for example, in Councillor Bowles' question, the way that the economy of what we're calling Greater Lincolnshire, but our part of the world, is inextricably interlinked. And having a common vision, having common aspirations, and above all, working to deliver those in a practical sense. It's very easy just to descend into talking shops. What we see is a great deal of practical delivery and proper assessment of real problems. Next to gender item is a classic case of one of those. I think actual delivery and a practical working body, from my personal point of view, and I respect Councillor Baxter differs from it, is absolutely vital. And this long-term vision for all of our residents, for all of our businesses, and how we achieve that is indeed an important aspect of this committee's work, and I think it's one we'll reflect in the proposal. I'm not seeing any further hands up, so I'm going to move on now to the formal proposal before us, which is that I move that this committee endorses the report and requests that our comments from today's discussion are captured and taken under consideration by officers responsible for informing and shaping our own activity, and that would include the point that came up at the very end of the discussion about that long-term vision for economic development and indeed for infrastructure. So, does anyone dissent? I think we will possibly have one person. Councillor Baxter is abstaining. I'm seeing no other hands going up, and therefore I think by majority that matter is agreed. And thank you for a stimulating item on that. So, we now move on to agenda item 8, which is Lincolnshire County Council's response to labour market trends. This report can be found on pages 41 to 48 of the agenda pack and outlines the current labour market challenges posed to Lincolnshire and details the response provided by Lincolnshire County Council to these challenges. To provide context, the four main challenges that the paper focused on are: 1, economic inactivity levels, which have significantly increased in Lincolnshire, leading to reduced economic output and increases in benefit claims. 2, that employers have more challenges filling jobs due to a lack of appropriately skilled applicants. 3, that Lincolnshire has above average levels of young people not in education, employment or training. And 4, that the training provider system is fragile in Lincolnshire, leading to gaps in provision at local level. And these challenges are concurrent and interlinked. So the actions formally before us are twofold. 1, to review and comment on the work taking place to deliver and support post-16 employment and skills activity across the county. Comment on whether it tackles the recruitment and skills challenges councillors are hearing from local business. And secondly, to offer our views and comments on the council's approach to supporting Lincolnshire training providers in the context of reducing gaps in the provision at local level. And the report will be presented by James Beattie, who we've just heard from, Policy and Research Executive Manager, who's in the chamber, and Thea Croxhall, Adult Learning and Skills Manager, who I understand is joining us via Teams. So over to you, either James and Thea, or Thea and James. Who's going to lead us off?
Thank you very much, Chairman, and good morning, councillors, for the second time. Yes, in the name of brevity, I will just briefly run through the labour market situation, and then I'll hand over to Thea to describe the current activity that's being undertaken to meet some of those challenges. In summary, Lincolnshire, as we will all have witnessed, has always had some challenges when it comes to labour market supply. Historically, unemployment and economic inactivity in Lincolnshire has actually been roughly in line with national averages. However, businesses consistently tell us that they have struggled to recruit more than the national average, and that has been picked up through decades of surveys at a national and local level. Much of this obviously is to do with the nature of Lincolnshire's economy and the rurality that we have associated with that. the pool of people to take jobs is far more dispersed than it might be in a conurbation. So if we consider that the population of Lincolnshire is slightly less than the metropolitan area of Leeds, but about 13 times the size. Therefore, the importance of supporting people to get the skills that businesses need is essential for the ongoing prosperity of the Lincolnshire economy, but of course is by no means an easy task. And a further complication to that is what we've seen since 2020 and the COVID pandemic. The challenges obviously are set out in the paper, but the unique nature of that pandemic and the stop-start of the economy has caused effectively a reconfiguration of the labour market. We've seen that nationally, and we're still seeing the effects of that still fall into place, and we're still not sort of on the course from there. So Lincolnshire is particularly exposed to the risks, at-risk sectors during COVID. So if we think about, for example, hospitality in our towns and on the coast, food production, another example of sectors that saw quite strange circumstances emerge during COVID. And economic inactivity we have actually seen has risen quite sharply since 2020 in Lincolnshire, and suddenly we are experiencing higher levels of economic inactivity than the national average, quite significantly. What the net result of that is there are actually fewer people in Lincolnshire who are looking for work now than there were in 2019. And obviously, as a consequence of that, businesses across all of the sectors and indeed locations, and almost every single sector that we would speak to, have been telling us that they are struggling to get the right people to fill their roles, and that the quality of their applicants is lower, and therefore, as a result, they are struggling to meet their business plans. So, with all that in mind, I think the importance of some of the activity that Thea's about to describe is essential to kind of maintain that or bring forward some of that economic prosperity. And with that, I'll pause and bring Thea in, if I may, Chairman.
Thea, would you like to come in at this point?
Yes, thank you, James. Good morning, Chair, and good morning, councillors. So in response to the labour market issues outlined by James, the Council has developed a range of activities, from work experience opportunities offered in our county offices restaurant, here in the county offices building, to targeted use of available funding to upskill residents to meet business needs. Councillor Davey talked earlier about the 2023 Lincolnshire Apprenticeship Awards, which is a piece of work that is coordinated in our area. Staff time is used well to develop strong working relationships with local further education providers, the Department for Work and Pensions, and as you heard from Justin earlier, with the LEP. This maximises available funding to avoid duplication and to also help progression across the different programmes. After the recent full council meeting, councillors were able to meet with a number of LEP colleagues working in the Careers Hub and to hear about the work that they undertake to match schools with local employers and the associated benefits from this approach. Now, we recognise that training providers are finding the current delivery climate very challenging. The funding landscape is changing, and that's compounded by a shortage of teaching staff in specific areas, aligned to the challenges of delivering in a rural county and trying to meet the needs of residents and employers in sparsely populated areas. So, as outlined in the paper, Lincolnshire County Council continues to deliver those projects that are effective, whilst recognising that with additional resource, we could do more. We are working with training providers to understand their concerns and to develop a shared approach strategy to government for capital support. We plan to use the Learning and Skills Improvement Plan, which is being developed by the Federation of Small Businesses, which aims to put employers more firmly at the heart of the skills system to guide our longer term work. So thank you for taking the time to read the paper and for listening to James and myself. So members of the committee are invited to comment on the work taking place as outlined in the paper, to support the post-16 employment and skills activity across the county. Does this tackle the recruitment and skills challenges that councillors are hearing from local businesses? And secondly, to comment on the council's approach to supporting Lincolnshire training providers in the context of reducing gaps in provision at a local level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. Thank you very much, Thea. We'll move now to questions from members, and I'm going to start this time with Councillor Higgs.
Thank you, Chairman. We've heard a lot in that report about what we're doing with employers, but I'd like to know what the council's doing with further education centres, advising them of possible shortfalls and recruiting for companies from that direction. Thank you.
Who's picking that one up, James or Thea?
I think that's me. Thank you,
Go for
Chair.
it.
Yeah. So in terms of working with FE providers, the providers all have their own employer advisors in their centres who will work directly with the local employers to identify where skills gaps are and then to align their provision in order to meet those skills gaps where possible. We set up regional training provider forums in the past academic year where training providers are able to share where there are skills gaps across the county, where training providers are struggling to recruit tutors to deliver those skills gaps, and to look at sharing or some collaborative work where possible to try and reduce skills gaps. I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Councillor Higgs, do you want to come back on that? Are you happy? And next, Vice Chairman, Councillor Griggs.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this report was quite interesting to me. I speak to residents quite frequently, doing all sorts of things. And one of the residents I was speaking to recently, it was a mum on the school run, and she was saying that it's really difficult to find a job. And she's not FE age, she's early 30s, so she has no contact with anyone except for the job centre in terms of trying to find a job. And she was saying she's applied for absolutely loads of jobs, and most of the time businesses don't even bother to respond and say, really sorry, your application wasn't good enough or anything. So I feel there's a bit of onus on the businesses, because I offered to look at a CV for her. Not saying I'm good at writing CVs, but I figured an extra eye doesn't hurt. And I had a look and I went, okay, there's nothing really wrong with it. Admittedly, there's a period where obviously she's been raised in a young family, so obviously there's periods of economic inactivity. And I looked at one of the applications for the job she'd applied for, and ironically, it was a care home next to the school, and it said, any shifts considered. And she was like, that'd be brilliant, because I can drop the kids off at school. Literally, it's 20 metres from the school gate. I can work until the kids come out of school, and I can leave. Brilliant. And she got an email saying, you've not been successful. And I had a look at the job advert, and it said, essentially said, no skills required, training given. And to just get a, nah, sorry, you're not good enough. And she said it became really perplexing for her when she's applying for all these jobs, getting no feedback, and then we hear from employers, and obviously I work at Boston College, and one of the things we hear all the time is, future-proofing the workforce, trying to get them ready for the next generation of jobs. But we're talking about people who aren't that much older than school leavers in the grand scheme of things, who've still got probably 35, 40 years left in the workplace, and they're really struggling to be engaged or to hear any feedback at all. So I would say that some of it's down to employers not giving good enough feedback when they're rejecting these people who are not skilled enough, because then that would allow people who are applying to go, oh, okay, so that's the skills level that I need to be able to get these jobs that are available. I also thought it was quite interesting when we look at our response to the trends and how we're working with FE providers, such as Boston College, where I work, but we don't seem to be achieving the metrics desired. So what's the plan going forward to improve the outcomes? Because obviously what we're doing is not working if there's more people economically inactive, and average levels of young people in educational training is decreasing. And I did have something else and it's left my mind. So if you'll forgive me, Chairman, I'll come back when I remember it, if that's okay.
That is okay. James is here. Would any points there that you'd like to come back on? James.
Yeah, I'll perhaps touch on the second point first, and then Thea might want to come in on the first point. I think that it's absolutely the case that we recognise some of the challenges that are being presented with regards to employers too, and in terms of that engagement. I think though the thing that's absolutely critical at the moment that is working quite well is that career hub relationship that's being run through the LAP that Thea mentioned earlier, and that is actually bringing employers to understand the careers, have that kind of symbiotic understanding of one another between employers and people who are actually seeking employment too, to bring those levels sort of even in. And I know that the Careers Hub is angled into sort of early years curriculum rather than into sort of the age bands that Councillor Griggs was talking about. But I think that there is a recognition that actually it is a two-way street, and that there is some that employers do need to become more engaged in this issue if they are to be successful in getting the right people for the right jobs, but also presenting themselves as good employers and making sure that they are getting the best possible sort of applicants in. I'll leave Thea if she's got any comments on the first point. Thank you.
Thea.
Yes, thank you, James. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was just going to make a comment that at times there does seem to be a little bit of a disconnect between people looking for work and those employers. For example, the care home that you were talking about, who always seem to have adverts looking for staff, yet aren't necessarily taking on those applicants. But through our direct delivery arm, we deliver a course in schools that's called Family Learning, and as part of those courses, which are targeted at mums and parents with young children, there is an employability section where participants are able to update their CVs and also have an interview with the National Career Service. And it feels like that this programme is benefiting people, that we could perhaps do with rolling it out more so that more schools and more parents get the benefit of that to help with their job applications. Thank you.
Thank you for both of those. I'm going to go on to other members in a moment, but I wonder if I could put something to James and Thea that really grows out of the point that Councillor Griggs raised. I found this report, I was going to say I found the report very challenging. The report is an excellent report, but the subject matter, or the story that it is telling, is a very challenging one, particularly this fundamental that we have this increased level of economic inactivity at both ends of the demographic scale, and at the same time a significant labour shortage which is restricting economic development and prosperity in Lincolnshire. And the question clearly is how to bridge that. So a couple of questions on that. Firstly, you eloquently described the fact that this is something, a symptom, if you will, that we see nationally in terms of increased economic inactivity. I just wonder whether the causes are the same nationally, whether we really understand whether those causal relationships are common across the country, or whether there are any unique factors in our own part of the world. And secondly, if this is a new and different challenge that has come along since COVID, do we need to respond differently to the way we're responding now? As Councillor Griggs has said, the metrics in terms of results are not overwhelmingly comforting. Do we need to start thinking outside the box? Do we need to start thinking of new things to do? Because at the moment, however worthy what we are doing is, overall there's a big problem that doesn't seem to be going away. James.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Indeed, the challenges that we are seeing in the labour market at the moment are being felt nationally, but they are slightly more acute in certain areas. So in Lincolnshire particularly, there are two main drivers that are seeing increases in economic inactivity. That is firstly people who are retiring or retired during the COVID pandemic, who are of working age but are retiring early and choosing to leave the labour market at that point. presumably because of the nature in which the pandemic happened, and indeed their sort of working circumstances changed. And the second one is so you've got early retirements, and then we've got people who are on long-term sick, and that is the largest upward change that we've seen in Lincolnshire, which is slightly different to what we've seen nationally. Now, we haven't yet been able to really get under the skin of the actual causal relationship between the increases in long-term sickness. What's driving that? We are trying to do some work at the moment with DWP to unpick what the kind of changes are within some of the benefit claimants that are being made in terms of understanding particular aspects of that. However, we have seen that is the largest uptick, and that is the largest probable differentiator between Lincolnshire and the national average. One thing I would say is that the most recent set of statistics have shown that actually it is correcting slightly, and there is a slight decrease on the last sort of quarter's data in terms of economic inactivity in Lincolnshire, but it's still well above the national average. So we'll continue to see whether that comes down and whether it's a symptom of just the market settling itself out in that kind of macro sense. I'll happily hand over to Thea to see if she has any other thoughts on your second point.
Thea, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, thank you, James. Thank you, Chair. I was going to make a comment on the above average levels of young people not in education, employment or training, the ones classified as NEET. There have been some changes to this cohort coming out of COVID. We found during COVID that a lot of young people spent inordinate amounts of time in their rooms at home, and the knock-on effect of that for joining the labour market is that they are needing a lot more support. We recognise that there are mental health issues there as well. So in terms of designing different programmes, as you mentioned earlier, it feels like there needs to be more hand-holding on the parts of providers and for helping people into work, and also ensuring that employers have got that good mental health support in the background and to support people in the workplace. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Spratt.
Thank you, Chairman. I think since COVID there's been a massive change in people's attitude in terms of establishing a different work-life balance. And just to echo the points about more people being economically inactive, I wanted to concentrate on the point that my friend Councillor Higgs and Councillor Griggs made. I spent just under 25 years working in further education, and I would suspect Councillor Griggs, at the college where he works at now, has the same issues. I would suspect, for example, he used the carer example. I would suspect that Councillor Griggs' college runs courses for carers. And I would suspect that those courses, like in the day when I worked in further education, were oversubscribed probably every single year, and yet there's a shortage of people going into caring. But there's an oversubscription, and I think the council playing a facilitating role here, and I think that this report it certainly makes excellent reading despite the difficulty of the subject area. But the only way this problem is going to be solved is if more money, and I don't work in FE now, so I don't have to declare an interest, but the only way to sort this is for the government to pay more attention to further education. And that is to put money into skills-based courses so that we can train carers and plumbers and plasterers and joiners and brickies, rather than necessarily, and there was a report, I forget the name of the report, published 2 or 3 years ago that suggested that far too much government money was going into universities for people doing degrees that they probably won't use, rather than further education where people can learn skills for life for the jobs that are needed, not just in Lincolnshire, but more widely afield. And that's all I've got to say at the moment. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, and I think you do make an important point. The value given to vocational training, to skills-based training in some other economies very close to ours, which are arguably more successful than ours. Historically, in Germany, for example, the individual trades, it is just as honourable to go and learn a trade as it is to go to university and do a degree. I'm not knocking either, but it does seem to me that that cultural root of a balance, an equity between those two things plays a very important part in economic development, and it's something we need to strive for. I think Councillor Bowles was next.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just two questions, really. First one's relating to the hospitality sector and what was said around that. Do we believe that the numbers relating to that issue are sort of skewed at the minute? Certainly my experience that from being involved in management of a social club and visiting pubs on a regular basis, that sort of pre-COVID, your bar staff, your restaurant staff would be younger people, students. Certainly seems to be the case now that it's not. It's middle-aged people who are using it as second jobs to supplement their income. So whilst people are getting those jobs, it does have the potential to be a lot worse if times change and people don't necessarily need those second jobs like they do at the minute. Then there could be a lot of trouble coming down the line. And second question relates to the NEETs numbers and what members have just said around further education. Do we believe that the decisions of organisations such as Lincoln College to withdraw further education facilities, particularly in Gainsborough, the closing of the Gainsborough College, which, as Councillor Spratt just alluded to, provided plumbing, really successful motor mechanics, hairdressing, all those kind of qualifications and skills were being delivered successfully and to a lot of people in Gainsborough. Lincoln College removed that provision, closed the site, no public consultation, no involvement with local residents, local councillors. So obviously that does have an effect because some of those children now aren't involved because they don't want to travel to Lincoln, can't travel to Lincoln, whatever the situation might be. So whilst it's not decisions made by this council, those are the decisions that are affecting these numbers quite clearly. So what can we do to hold organisations like Lincoln College to account to ensure that provision that is there, is working, is successful, is used, should be maintained and not removed? Thank you.
James, would you like to pick that one up?
Yes, and again, I'll take the first point on that one and let Thea speak to the second, perhaps. So, in terms of the visitor economy and the observation, I absolutely thank Councillor Bowles for his observation there, because I think that is a really helpful vignette into a particular sector. I think the visitor economy sector in particular and the hospitality has probably borne the brunt of the difficulties, I dare say, and has seen probably the most radical change in which the sector is operating, and indeed is still struggling to fill some of the vacancies. And that is due to the nature of the jobs having changed. And I know that a number of visitor economy businesses are having to think very hard about the way in which they engage their future workforce, because suddenly it's not seen as necessarily a particularly favourable sector to work in due to the impacts during COVID and so on. So absolutely recognise that. And I do think, though, as Councillor Bowles has also alluded to, that there is some skewing in the figures there in such that we are seeing that kind of slight, we will start to see a little bit more of normality return, I suppose, but the normal will not be the same within the type of people who are taking those roles now as it may have been pre-pandemic. But in total, we will start to see those things iron out. It is expected over the next few years.
Thea, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, thank you. So we talked in the paper that we know that training providers are finding the current delivery climate challenging. The funding landscape is changing, and the closure of the Lincoln College's Gainsborough campus is one of the casualties of that. It would have been made on an economic decision. But I cannot comment on the accountability aspect of the question. I don't know whether Justin wants to add anything there. Thank you, Justin.
Yeah, Chairman, thank you. The way that post-16 training works is very much free market, and therefore economic decisions are made. So it's very difficult for us to be able to intervene. However, there are really two things that we do. And the first one is that we are part of a commissioning board with the Lincolnshire Federation of FE colleges, which enables us to get quite close to the colleges and to understand some of the challenges, some of the issues that they are addressing. Now, we don't have a power, we are simply a partner within there, but that gives us the opportunity to work with them and to address some of their challenges and some of the issues which they wish to raise. The second one, and it was mentioned earlier, is the LSIP, the Skills Improvement Plan, which the Federation of Small Businesses are putting together, which should give a steer to the FE sector about priorities within Greater Lincolnshire and gives, again, a backcloth for a relationship between government, the FE sector and ourselves about how the investment can be made. I'm taking two sort of actions out of the conversation which has taken place so far, Chairman. The first one is that wherever possible, we should seek to promote that vocational training should be considered as powerfully and as strongly as academic learning. So we will do that where there are government consultations, etc. And the second one is that we should continue to work with colleagues across other county council services. So I'm thinking adult social care, I'm thinking children's services, etc., to make sure that the products that we have that help small businesses can also help the small businesses that they work with to recruit and to be stronger and to be more productive. So it feels like the conversation really has led us to a couple of very specific actions that we need to take forward, Chairman.
Thank you, I'm grateful for that. Can I just ask a supplementary before I move on to the next councillor? You mentioned the Learning and Skills Improvement Plan, and it was mentioned in the presentation. Could you give members an idea of the timing around that? When will it emerge? When will we start seeing practical actions?
So today is the very last day for people to make comments. We have engaged thoroughly with the Federation of Small Businesses, and we've promoted and amplified their messages to the business community. FSB will now take some weeks, potentially months, to shape up their analysis and their recommendations. We'll be involved in offering support in terms of interpretation and so on, and there is a view that within around 6 months they will produce that plan with a view to them then being able to work between, as I say, government and the FE sector and that knowledge to help shape provision into the future.
Good. I'm relieved to hear that. And next, Councillor Kelly, you've been extremely patient. Thank you for waiting. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I completely agree about the status of vocational education and academic education, which has been really a structural problem in this country for a long time. And what I find very frustrating, I've been a teacher as well for 30 years, although I did teach academic subjects, was that I felt that most children, or a large proportion of children, did not have a suitable curriculum, even at below 16. So when you're talking about apprenticeships, I think, and I know some schools have done this, at 14 they have vocational courses where they actually allow children to, to go out and do the specific vocational course that they're interested in. So I just think that we've got a real problem in terms of educating I think, I mean, it's beyond our remit completely, but I think that the curriculum in the national curriculum in many ways is completely inappropriate. You know, so that's what my first point. My second point is that I think it'd be really useful to find out why so many young people are economically inactive. Obviously, to a certain extent, I think there's two reasons. They haven't got the necessary qualifications, but also when I look at what's going on in the job market for many young people, I feel really sorry for them because they've got 0-hour contracts in many cases, so they have no regular hours. So it's not just about pay and working conditions, it's what they have to do to get a job, which is completely different from when I got a job where I had a permanent contract, knew what my hours were, had employment rights. And so when I hear, you know, the government saying, oh, unemployment rates have fallen again, that's fine, but what sorts of jobs are people actually doing? And obviously, you know, so economic inactivity, to a certain extent, is not just a skills-related problem, it's also looking at the reason why people aren't willing to work. And I think that's a really important thing that we have to address. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kelly. I think there's a theme emerging here this morning, isn't there, which is a very clear message we can send. And I do think member after member has spoken about things which relate back to practical solutions. Let's not forget, this is not just a problem for our young people, but when we're dealing with young people, we're not only talking about the impact on economy and the general prosperity of Lincolnshire, we're also talking about individual people's life chances, and that's very important for us to remember as well. Councillor Dara, I think you wanted to come in at this point.
Thank you, Chairman. And whilst we've been discussing this, I've just had a look on the County Council's website for careers opportunities, and I think out of the 42 vacancies, I've just keyword searched it, and there isn't one mention of apprenticeship. So whether it's the wrong time of year, I don't know for people to apply for apprenticeships. But just on the points raised, it's been a really interesting discussion. I think it will be very hard to encourage the majority of those retirees who made up their own mind in COVID that they could financially survive without having to work or without having to work full time, to attract those individuals back into the workplace. And it'd be interesting just to see how that comes into fruition. I'd just be curious to know, the data for Lincolnshire, is it skewed in any way because of people who retire, who want to, you know, move into a rural area, perhaps near the coast? Do we have any idea of how that might impact our data in Lincolnshire? And just on one point, really, that we've got no power over whatsoever, but it hasn't been mentioned, and it is a barrier, mainly for women of a certain age in the workplace. It's the cost of childcare, and I would say that as a new parent, but you know, many young women who have had children, they will look at the maths and they will look at their finances and conclude actually going back into the workplace full time with a child in childcare full time, it's just not worth it. So they'll either remove themselves from the workplace completely or go part time. And I think any government that decides that actually this is a barrier and we're going to properly fund childcare will attract many voters, you know, of people of a certain age. And actually, on that point, the cost of childcare in the UK is so much higher than other countries across the world, and it's a huge barrier. And that hasn't been mentioned in this report, but I suspect there are many young women and young men who are impacted by that. Thank you.
Thank you. James, did you want to come back on that?
Yes, absolutely. I think a really pertinent point from Councillor Dyer about the demographic of Lincolnshire in terms of the population. Indeed, that, you know, we have a higher population of those who are sort of age 50 plus who may be seeking early retirement and are already doing so. I think what's interesting post-pandemic is that the increase has been higher than the national increase. So we're already at quite a high base, but our increase has also fluctuated quite a bit more. And indeed, actually, the long-term sickness point as well may well be related to that, but we don't know that until we bear that out in the data. Just on the second point around sort of young mothers and things, we haven't seen a particular uptick in that. It is obviously a factor in the statistics, but it doesn't make up the predominant cohort of people who are economically inactive. But I do absolutely, as a new father myself as well, absolutely recognise the challenges that brings to, particularly to working mothers.
I can recognise in both of you the shadowed eyes and sleep-deprived looks of a new father. Some of us have been there as well. Justin, I think you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I think when I mentioned earlier about us making representations to government and others about the value of vocational learning, I think there's something that Councillor Dye has just mentioned which is really relevant as well, which is we have a problem, don't we, that nationally our employment policy is utterly driven around skills, but actually the problem for employment is often access, whether that's affordable childcare, whether it's affordable transport, whether it is adaptations for people with disabilities. So I think we need to take those forward. And I know we've made a number of comments during this debate about LCC being, I think the word powerless was used. I'd put a bit of challenge back there. I don't think we're powerless. I think we've got a lot of influence. Yes, maybe we don't have a veto, maybe we don't have power, but I think we've got a level of influence in this set of issues that the debate has shown that we can really wield in support of people in the county, businesses in the county and educational institutions in the county.
Yes, thank you for that. And that does go back to the theme that we've talked about in this meeting and at other meetings, and indeed it's been raised at the Scrutiny Management Board, the role of local government and of this council facilitating things, and the importance of having contacts in all sorts of different directions so we can bring people together. I won't say bang their heads together, but encourage people to do positive things, because we can often see an overview which others can't necessarily see. Hilton, I think you wanted to come back.
Councillor Keeley has covered some of the points that that I probably would have made. Something just occurred to me. The last time I was Ofsteded, as it were, the inspector asked me how many of my students were going on to university and had been going to university over the previous 3 years since the previous Ofsted. It's interesting that the Ofsted inspector didn't ask how many were going into apprenticeships or how many were going into the workplace or vocational education. So I do agree. I know Councillor Cleary didn't make that exact point, but to follow on from what she said. But I do want to say to Councillor Bowles as well, out of the 20-odd years I worked at Lincoln College teaching, I'd say 12 to 15 of those years they wanted to shut the college down at Gainsborough, and they did reduce the provision over a period of time. And as I say this bit tongue-in-cheek, as a Tory, but also as a trade union representative, I had meetings with Sir Edward Lee and the Member of Parliament for Lincoln at the time to try and stop some of those. But we have to remember as well, colleges, Lincoln College in particular when I was there, and I got to see the finances because I was also on the governors as well for a while, they're also subject to budget restraints, much the same as the council is. But the problem is, FE has always been considered to be the poor man, the poor relation of education sector. And you're not going to solve this problem either locally or nationally until more money is coming in, because you've got a demand issue for people wanting to do courses, to do jobs, but you can't supply that demand, and that's what's causing the problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Interesting debate. Excuse me, interesting debate, and quite a few subjects covered. I've made some notes, some have already been covered. I'll try not to repeat them. And great to hear the plan of action that Justin Brown discussed regarding the actions we mentioned in this meeting, and when we discussed vocational education, and also a plug for the piece of work that panel B is working on, and to announce a recommendation shortly regarding agriculture. Many opportunities in that sector are being explored in that report, which we do produce later in the year. Interesting comments there from Councillor Griggs regarding young people applying for positions. I saw one at the weekend. Young person, 100 applications, again, no response or very little response. So maybe a piece of work there where we could encourage through the previous paper, through LEP, to try and encourage some response to applications, because this also leads to confidence or what is wrong, to some the feedback there. Because this is about individual people's lives and circumstances, and economic inactivity is a concern. And Councillor Keeley spoke about the 2 reasons, and I think there's more than 2 reasons. We had that comment on zero contracts. Well, it shouldn't exist in care homes. In care homes, there's a piece of work to do for a number of hours, caring for people, important skill set, and they need to budget and plan their future and look at a career plan. That's where there's not a need for zero contracts. It may actually be required more at the other end of the spectrum. The comments such as Councillor Dye referred to, and they're over 50s that may be retiring based on a different lifestyle after COVID. Maybe that type of age group could actually be more appropriate to a zero contract, where they've got life skills and experience, and they could actually mentor younger people into different work, because confidence is an issue here, and when Councillor Ball spoke about, hospitality industry, the customer service. In many countries, it's a serious skill and taken seriously. Here, not as much with some sectors. We all know there's a connection between customer service and the business. We all know we often return to a business if we get good customer service. Well, we're not blaming the employer there. There's an issue there regarding training. If they can be trained properly regarding customer service, it does lead to return custom and the prosperity of that particular business and confidence of the worker. So there's a gap there which we need to fill. So, and also hopefully regarding, we hear of these concerns regarding economic inactivity, and hopefully we can have a further update in future regarding work experience and apprenticeships, because that's where hopefully, when we heard from the officers regarding work experience in this building here, we see in the photograph there the Spring Bridge at Sutton Bridge. Great to see that. It's great we are covering all parts of the county. So hopefully regarding work experience and apprenticeships, that is also taking place across the whole county. So hopefully in future reports we can hear progress on those particular areas when all these reports and comments are taken on board, and we can look at the feedback is actually taken on board, so we can see some reduction in those concerning figures. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. For those, do officers want to come back, or shall I move on to our next member? We'll move on to the next member, who I think is Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chairman. 4 quick points. Firstly, can someone explain why our wise and benevolent LEP, if we're so keen on promoting post-16 education, why did our wise and benevolent LEP give £2 million to a university centre in Grantham, which never happened, and £700,000 of that will never come back to the LEP, and Grantham still doesn't have a university centre. Secondly, I can't understand why there's a word missing from this report, and I understand the UK voted to leave the EU, and Lincolnshire overwhelmingly voted to leave the EU. However, I'm astonished that in a labour market report there is no mention of the impact of Brexit or changes in migration rules on the county. We had an awful lot of people from the EU who were doing work in the county, and there must have been a knock-on effect since the vote and since the changes. That must be a factor which we are dealing with. And similarly, the issues of migration and refugee and asylum seekers, maybe that part of that is part of the solution as well as part of a problem. Thirdly, another bit that's missing from the report seems to be which areas are we short of people in? Is it all areas? I know anecdotally from the long conversations about the future of the Grantham Hospital that recruiting people to the NHS in some circumstances is difficult. Agriculture, I understand that both food production and agriculture are suffering shortages, and the skill levels involved in those are variable. And I don't think that we will get many 16-year-old apprentices wanting to be long-distance lorry drivers, for which I understand there's a shortage. So that's an issue. And finally, there are other reasons why, and part of that is about what we are as a county, and there are good things and bad things about it. But if you are a 17 to 25-year-old looking for employment in Lincolnshire, you're going to look at access to transport, access to public transport, access to entertainment, access to art, and we've got a university centre in Holbeach, which I understand is very good, but how many nightclubs are there within a 20-mile radius of Holbeach?
Well, that last question is one which I'm sure our officers can instantly answer. James, do you want to pick up on any of those points? Because then I think we're going to wrap this section up.
Yeah, if I may, I'll pick up on a couple of the areas that Councillor Baxter's mentioned there that I can speak to. Firstly is the point around Brexit and the impact that that has had on the labour market, and there have been previous reports that have been produced both by the LEP and have been through this scrutiny committee in previous guises that are focused on the impact on EU exit. I think Councillor Baxter is right to point that out in terms of the impact. It is quite focused, and I think what we are trying to illustrate here is the challenges that we have within our labour market as it currently stands, and in relation to coronavirus impact particularly, and what we have witnessed within the economy. It becomes much more complicated when we start to try and unpick the impacts of EU exit. There's no doubt that businesses are telling us, particularly in food producing areas, that they are still seeing shortages, but however that we do have to appreciate that I suppose the changes that we are kind of demonstrating through this are predominantly driven through coronavirus. The second, in terms of understanding, furthering our understanding, particularly around the areas that we are short in, there has been a piece of work that the LEP has previously undertaken. It's called the Skills Report, which will actually be, I suppose, a bit similar to the work that the Federation of Small Businesses is currently undertaking. And that piece of work is one of the real drivers of that, is to understand where those sort of future requirements might be and where the current sort of supply sits. So it is definitely looking at it in that kind of supply and demand by sector, not just in the total. So that report should well include quite clearly some of those areas where there needs to be that focus.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. A really, really interesting debate about a very important subject and a very challenging subject, a very difficult one to find solutions for, but this council is particularly well placed through its overarching level of contacts and the fact that we can, frankly, interest ourselves in anything. I know, Councillor Kelly, you said at one point, well, that's beyond our remit, but actually, the way I see the role of this committee, anything that touches on the environment or the economy will jolly well involve ourselves in. And if somebody wants to argue with that, they can. But there is always an interaction between, for example, education that you were talking about and the economy or indeed the environment. So I think we've had some themes coming out which Justin summed some of them up, particularly a stress from this committee on the issue of vocational skills and the FE sector. Justin, you made a point about social care, which is an important one. I think the message which I hope officers will get and the wider public will get from this committee is that we need to understand the individual causes of the problem. What are those causal relationships? And I think it would be helpful, this is a regular report that we get, if the next time when it comes back to this committee we had some more granular data about individual sectors. I think improving our understanding of the problem at the granular level is going to help all of us arrive at practical solutions, and practical solutions with some urgency. So the proposal formally before us is as follows. I move that the committee receives the report and endorses the work undertaken to deliver and support the skills development programmes across the county, and request that our comments from today's discussion in relation to the approach to supporting training providers to bridge gaps, as captured, are taken under consideration by officers and relevant portfolio holders. Does anyone dissent from that? I am seeing no dissent, therefore that is agreed. Colleagues, it is now almost 12, so we're running about 10 minutes behind. We are going to take a 10-minute comfort break. Please be back at 12 sharp. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We're back in formal session, and we are on item 9 of the agenda, colleagues, which is the local electric vehicle infrastructure pilot. This report can be found on pages 49 to 52 of the agenda pack and describes the work being done to improve access to electric charging infrastructure across Lincolnshire, with a particular focus on the local electric vehicle infrastructure, or LEVI, pilot. The pilot programme is presented in the context of the County Council's local transport plan and future funding opportunities. And the actions before us today are: the committee is invited to 1, endorse a continuation of the current approach, where the pilot funding is used to understand the best way to deliver electric vehicle charging on the highway in different geographical settings, and 2, provide comment that will shape future work on electrical vehicle infrastructure across Lincolnshire. And the report will be presented by Vanessa Strange, Head of Infrastructure Investment, and Tanya Vaughan, Senior Commissioning Officer, and they are with us, I believe, in the chamber. Over to you, Vanessa.
Good afternoon, Chairman, and thank you to councillors for taking the time to read this report, and a few things we would like to highlight today. This time last year, we were adopting the local transport plan, our 5th local transport plan as the County Council. An important part of that work was the work that we'd done across Greater Lincolnshire in terms of looking at the needs of electric vehicle charging and developing an EV strategy. And that document put us in a really strong position to bid for some pilot funding, which is detailed in the document. We're going with LEVI, but levy could be used as well. I'm open to options on that one. And the word pilot is really important to us, and I really want to emphasise that to everyone in the chamber. We've had 3 drivers really in terms of our approach to this, and firstly it's about encouraging a commercial model in Lincolnshire, and that's really about getting commercial operators here, delivering EV facilities for residents and businesses. And that will then provide a network which really functions well for everybody, and we don't get that left behind feeling, I suppose, for Lincolnshire. And thirdly, shaping a network of EV charging that works well for us as a local transport and highways authority. So the approach we're taking within this pilot, which is a pilot with a number of local authorities across the region, is really about testing different scenarios. So we're looking at trialling some chargers on the coast, some in market town settings, some in Lincoln, some in heritage settings, so that we can really see what works, what goes well, what are the particular challenges, because really quickly we're going to get some more funding to deliver EV chargers across Lincolnshire, and that funding, that next wave of funding, will be with us as soon as this year. So it's a really interesting opportunity for us to almost trial some work across Lincolnshire with this current round of LEVI. 3 thoughts I'd like to leave members with in particular today is just a reflection on the importance of the policy work that we often bring to you in terms of the grounding work that it does in helping us talk to government about what our ambitions are. So when we were here a year ago talking about LTP5, talking about an EV strategy, actually the reasons that we do that work is so that we're in a position to change the work we do, to bid for money, and to bring forward things like infrastructure for the people of Lincolnshire. Also, just to think about the opportunity that the pilot gives us. So some of the questions we've posed to members are around, are we asking the right questions? Are there other learning opportunities that we should be seeking as we go along? And we really welcome those thoughts and ideas. And also just to emphasise the fact that this pilot, these 100 or so charges that go in, are sort of step 1 along our journey, if you like, and that more funding is coming down the line. So for members who are sat there thinking, oh, why not my patch? Well, I'm sure there'll be a conversation in the months ahead about more sites, more locations. So those are some of the thoughts that I'll leave with members, and we'll take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. Councillor Hayes, I think you were first in the queue.
Thank you, Chairman. Vanessa, can I ask you what type of EV points we're thinking of putting in? Because my understanding is that there's 3 types. There's a trickle charge, a fast one and a super fast one. And the first 2 are questionable to how good they are for motorists to quickly charge up the cars. Thank you, Chairman.
Good afternoon, Chair and Councillors. Yes, I'll take that from Vanessa. We're actually looking to put in what we call the standard charge in the majority. They're the 7 kilowatt ones. They're not the slow ones, but they're certainly not the rapid ones. But we are looking to put in certain areas a hub facility which will have rapid chargers. Unfortunately, the funding model allows for us to put in the standard charge as part of the pilot. So for standard charge, we put in on-street residential, because the theory is that people will park up on the way outside their properties or in their neighbourhoods where they work, and the model is that that's what we need to trial. There's also a costing implication as well. So a standard charger is roughly about, at the funding model when the bid was awarded, was approximately £6,000. For a rapid charger, that's £70,000 to £75,000. So the amount of money we've got to get the model up and running is quite limited, because we're looking to draw in 75% match funding from the commercial market. So the levy funding that we've got is only actually 25% of the cost. So it's got to be generated by through the charge point operators. Also, the type of charger we're looking to put in will also be determined through the commercial model. So whether they're an on-street pedestal, whether they're a lighting column, or the big sort of hub locations that you see maybe in the supermarkets. So what we've made a conscious effort to do is to look at where the gaps in the market are that are current provisions in place. So your local Tesco's or your Starbucks, those sort of places, and to look to fill the gaps in between. So the idea is to possibly use on-street areas of parking where parking's already managed, that you can have longer stays. So some areas we've looked at, there's already 2-hour parking in place for standard vehicles. We'd look to expand that to a 4-hour wait for charge vehicles. And on a 7 kilowatt charge, that would get 80% of most cars back up to 80% of their charge. Okay, thank you.
Does that answer your question, Councillor? In that case, we'll move on. I think next is the Vice Chairman, Councillor Griggs.
Thank you very much. Councillor Haig picked upon a point I was going to raise. In terms of upgrading for the future, how easy is it to upgrade standard chargers to fast chargers? Because as I'm sure we're all aware, with mobile phone charging, for instance, or tablet charging, we all upgraded to better leads and higher, faster outputs, because that way we can charge our phone up in a reasonable amount of time. And I envisage that if we're looking for private sector investment, and again, I'm happy to be corrected if I'm wrong, but I would imagine that private industry are more likely to be less inclined if it's hard to upgrade, because if they've got an outdated technology they've installed not long after, then that's not particularly great. And my final point was just I was pleased to see, obviously it's great when we receive funding from the government to do stuff, and it was great to see the spread across the county of the different sites chosen. I know we don't have a site map, but listing off the different areas, we seem to go across the breadth of the county, so it's nice that it's not Lincoln-centric and that everywhere's being looked at. Thank you.
Could I just come back about the upgrades? That's what we've got to make sure that we get our technical specification right. So the idea is to write in a procurement that the upgrades are part of that, because it's a very fluid market. I think we've all been there for various technology changes over the years. So we're looking to award a contract. We need to make sure it's future-proofed. So the idea is that most of the equipment would belong with the charge point operator as part of for the term of the contract, and it would be in their interest to make sure that the latest technology moves in line with it. So that's how we're trying to address that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, I think Councillor Fleetwood.
Thank you. I think I'm a self-confessed piston head, I think is the expression. I was in the queue at the local chip shop recently, and I looked out the window because obviously the food wasn't ready, and this guy rolled up in a Tesla, and just by chance he came and stood in the queue behind me, so I had time to kill. So I said to him, that's interesting. I said, Tesla, how much does it cost you to run? And he was telling me all the numbers. I said, how do you charge it then? Do you charge it from home? And he said, no, I don't. I haven't got a charger there. I said, well, where do you go then? He said, well, my preferred place, and bearing in mind I'm on the edge of Lincoln, he said, is to go to Colsterworth, because it's the nearest Tesla fast charging point there is. So you start to question quite how many fast charging points there are across the county, and there is a need to do it. And I said, well, okay, if you can't get to Colsterworth, where do you go otherwise? He said, well, I actually go to Lidl on Outer Circle. And a lot of people, if you look at it when you're driving past, you'll find there's a lot of people queuing up to put vehicles in, and there is an absolute shortage. So yes, we do need a lot more charging points. Who knows, one point you might convert me, but I think I'm still fairly well converted onto fossil fuels at the moment. But yeah, the real point is, okay, we're putting the charging points in. With the current ongoing energy prices, what is the price differential, and will there always be a benefit financially to drivers, or are we looking at it just from an environmental issue?
I'll take that one, but I haven't got my calculator with me, Councillor Fleetwood. So I think the reasons for people to change shift over time, don't they? But from a county council point of view, we've got we're aware of the national imperative for us to enable people, if you like, to have that choice now, but the choice perhaps will become less over time as we have to all move towards EVs or to something other than all being piston heads, or maybe some of us still can be, who knows. I recognise entirely what you say about chargers. It's interesting to look at Tesla as an individual business. They've just opened some charge points at Newark. There are some going in at Boston. There are more plans to put others in across the county. And for us, actually, that's one of the challenges, is balancing all the activity that's happening in this space. So Tanya and others across highways and growth are doing a great piece of work in trying to map out, monitor what's going on, and also do a bit of prediction about what's happening with the market as well. So at the same time that the County Council have this funding, there are charges going into District Council car parks as part of a sort of second strand of this money. So it's about trying to create a really positive network for residents and businesses. And I say that partly because we're often approached, yes, by people who want to change their own personal car to an EV, but it's also people whose car or van is becoming electric with work, and suddenly they're saying to us, actually, I've got an opportunity to bring my work van, for example, home at night, and I want to do that because that works for me and my family, but I'd actually also really like to be able to charge it at home or near to home. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to address, I think, through this. So one of the particular things about this piece of funding is how does it work on our highway network, as well as complementing the rest of the EV provision across Lincolnshire.
Thank you very much for that answer. We'll move on from fish and chips. Next is Councillor Dyer.
Thank you, Chairman. It's exciting, and I look forward to seeing this progress this year and where it leads to in future years. But just on the on-street element of these parking points, and I mean, just Lincoln, for instance, this scheme, where do you envisage those points being placed? And I know we're in the early stages and you haven't developed the matrix yet, but for instance, will it be a street in Sinsel Bank or off of Monk's Road? The reason I ask that, so that parking space next to those chargers, will there have to be a TRO just to restrict who can and can't park in that area? And then you've got questions of, well, are people from Outer Circle Road going to drive and park in an area where there already is limited parking? But also, if a resident on that street has an EV charge point, that's great. They've got an electric car, but does that mean that they're the only house on the street that has a reserved parking bay? So, and I know this is the trial, but I'd be curious to know how we expect to overcome these barriers, because it will wind some people up and it could potentially cause issues. But then just moving forward and looking ahead after this year, because I can see in the report that 2023, you want all of these rolled out and installed. So next year, for instance, after this trial is complete, will we be in a position where a resident will be able to apply to the council, like you can with a dropped curb, apply to, I want to pay for a EV hookup outside of my house, they pay for it and they get it all carried out and complete by an approved supplier? Is that a place where we want to end up in a year or so's time? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor, and welcome to my world. That's very much a lot of the questions I've been at whilst driving around trying to put together some ideas for how we facilitate the delivery of the pilot. And that's so, for example, we've looked in the Skegness area, we've looked at, that's a mix of demographics of people that are residents and visitors. In the Lincoln area, we've tried to look at areas of commercial activity as well as residents, but the bid is very specific. It must be areas with limited or no off-street parking to qualify. So that realistically throws up the ideas of Sinsel Bank, Monks Road, those sort of areas. Also the areas of the north of Lincoln, like on the Ermine Estate, St Giles, those sort of things. We only need a very small amount of charges in this pilot. And the last thing we want to do is alienate everybody at the start of the process. So it's about being sensitive about where we locate them. So as I said, I've picked some areas that are areas where traffic is already managed, parking bays that are already 2 hours, 4 hours, those sort of things. I think we have to be very sensitive around parking. We all know people like to park outside their houses, and in those sort of areas, that parking is of a premium. And we also know that it's actually not policy to allow people to do that. So it's a balance. We've been very sensitive where we've been able to try and locate and suggest initial ideas for this pilot. But yes, I think going forward, that'll need those options become more limited. But that's what we want to learn. How do we engage with locals? How do we do it with people rather than to residents? So we look in areas of Boston that's in the terraced areas, but also near to the town centre. Horncastle offers us another dynamic that not only residents can use it, locals coming in and out for the market, but actually people might stop off on the way to Skegness for a cup of tea, charge the car, that sort of thing. So that'll bring some economic benefits. But you can't be seen to be giving somebody something and then they're going to lose something in return. I think we've got to be very sensitive to that, and I think that's what the pilot's trying to tease out. There is no right and wrong answers. I'm sure we'll get areas where we think we've worked it all out, and we'll find we haven't, and other areas where we might expect more resistance and we find it's a big hit. I think we've got to also understand the technology that sits around it and how intrusive that can be. Initially, TROs may be required, but equally, if we pick the areas where parking's already enforced, then the TRO can be changed. There'll be an amendment. So it doesn't lend itself to being outside your house, but equally, I think going forward, as more and more of these vehicles become available, we need to look at that in the wider context, and hopefully the lessons learned from the pilot will help to feed into policy going forward, because it isn't one size fits all, and actually going forward we need to develop a strategy based on the lessons learned, and we need to undertake these works to enable those lessons to be thrashed out, really. So regarding sort of going forward, I'll pass on to Vanessa if that's okay.
I'm not sure I have much to add to that, Tanya, other than I think you're right. It's what could we learn as a highways authority in terms of individuals approaching us, asking for opportunities to charge their vehicles, and that's something I think we'll be thrashing out with members as well as ourselves across the coming months, really, as we understand a bit more. The policy that we have at the moment really deals with the practicals of things like trailing cables across the pavement, as opposed to what we can sort of proactively help with. So that might be the shift.
Thank you very much indeed for that. I do have my beady eye on the clock. It is important that we are thorough in these things, but at the same time, we need to try and run to time. So if members could be thorough but concise in their questions, and officers could be concise but thorough in their answers, that will help us going forward. Next is Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chairman. I've been told by district council members in Stamford to come here and please make sure you don't knock Stamford off the list. They are delighted that they've made the list as a heritage town, as Britain's first conservation first conservation area, they're over the moon that it's coming. Meanwhile, somebody else has asked what the effect would be, which I think you've just mentioned about trailing cables over the pavement. And while it's great that people are choosing electric over fossil fuel, if that impedes people who are using active travel, pedestrians, cyclists and so on, then that's a bad thing. So I am interested in how it would be managed in a town like Stamford, which is congested. But obviously I don't expect that you would have the answer now, but I'm pleased that you're mindful of it. Finally, I'm delighted that we've got the best part of £1 million, or the scheme has got the best part of £1 million to do this over the areas concerned. Brilliant. Is it ever going to turn a profit? Is there ever going to be a way of generating income from this, or is it something that the public sector is doing to get things started, and then once it's going, then the private sector will come in and take all the dosh?
I think our push around this is about encouraging the commercial sector to be more interested in Lincolnshire. At the moment, they're very engaged elsewhere and not as engaged here as we'd like them to be. So that is our focus. In terms of ownership of charge points, there may be some charge points that we end up owning that are on our land, but that's not the driver for this pilot at the moment, but happy to pick that conversation up outside of committee if that's of interest to Councillor Baxter.
Is it expected to be cost neutral?
Well, we'll get a revenue share from the charges that are put in. That is part of the model. But the work to us doesn't have a cost. It will be the commercial provider and the pump priming from the Levi fund. So it's national funding that will pick up the gap, if you like.
And moving on, I think we have Councillor Spratt.
Just very briefly, Chairman, obviously there are practical issues, cables across footpaths and such like. Would you envisage that in the longer run, instead of garages selling diesel and petrol, they'll have 30 or 40 charging points in order to look after public demand? And as far as the point that Councillor Baxter has said, do you not think that the market eventually, once the subsidy has stopped, because it's a pump prime subsidy essentially to get the commercial sector involved, that petrol companies and indeed car companies will probably click somewhere up there and think we need to start supplying these spots, perhaps in large numbers, because if they don't, they're not going to sell the cars. And they won't want people to use public transport. I know the council has a policy, and public bodies and the government might want people to use public transport, but the bottom line is there will be a commercial issue here, and the market will solve the. I'm sure I'm not an unadulterated supporter of the market, but I think the market will solve this in due course. It'll take time.
Thank you for that. Vanessa, do you want to come back on that one?
Just to say, quite a number of the charge point companies are owned by the petrochemical industry. If you sort of work back through Companies House or wherever in terms of understanding who owns what. So they clearly see a shift that they seek to be part of. And a lot of the big charging points are at either petrol stations traditionally or places where people are stopping for teas and coffees that appear at lots of roundabouts across the country. So, yes.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move us on, but I've got two final quick questions. I was at Potterhanworth Parish Council last night, and a very alert parish councillor asked me, will Potterhanworth be getting one of these? I'm going to ask that question directly, but I'm generalising it. Looking at the list, Boston, Horncastle, Lincoln, Urban, Skegness, Mablethorpe, Coastal and Stamford Heritage. We are in a very rural county. And I appreciate this is a pilot and we can't cover everything in a pilot. What about the future for provision in our villages where a lot of our people live? And related to that, and perhaps going back to Hilton's point, It's all very well saying we'll put 30 or 40 chargers in a large garage forecourt, but grid supply, just how much of an issue is grid supply, particularly when we start looking at fast or super fast chargers?
Grid supply is a major issue, really, and I think that's what it comes down to, the rapid standards, that sort of thing. There's a far greater draw on the network if for a rapid charges, so there is going to be a challenge going forward for grid supply. We know there's a problem with Lincolnshire. I think village-wise, I think it's definitely probably the next on our list was to look at a village solution. I suppose if you look at it on the flip side, how many villages have a petrol station currently? So it's about looking at local localities and probably areas. So Potter Hamworth obviously doesn't have a garage, neither does Branston, but we're local to Lincoln. But that wouldn't mean you'd rule it out. I think we'd need to then learn the lessons that we picked up as part of the pilot and how we scale that down. And I think that's definitely an area where we've looked at Lincoln, we've looked at clusters, mini clusters within Lincoln to try and learn different lessons. We're quite limited on the pilot with the timescales and the amount of funding we've got. So that's definitely something I think would be following in the next tranche.
Thank you very much. Right, I think we've given this one a oh, I beg your pardon. Councillor Fleetwood, very quickly, if you would.
Yes. Just to pick up on grid supply, it'll be interesting because when people commute home, they'll be taking the cars home, parking them outside of their properties, wherever. Then the next thing you know is the electric kettle goes on, and they put the microwave on and the cooker on and everything else. And then you start to wonder exactly how the capacity of the grid will cope, because everything will be buzzing between, let's say, 5 and 7 o'clock. So there needs to be some level of off-peak charging facility or bonus at some point.
So very briefly, in the wonderful future that we'll all be entering, the opportunity that's seen by many is that the car actually becomes the battery for the house. So in our smart home, the car can complement really the energy demand. So that's the aspiration for vehicle to grid charging, as they would call it.
Thank you for that, and that really is the last question. I think we do have to move on. A very, very interesting debate, and we look forward to a detailed briefing, perhaps an interim briefing on the pilot once it's established and running. It would be extremely interesting to hear the detail of what it moves. So formally, there is a proposal. I move that the committee endorses the report and current approach as described in the paper, and I ask that our comments from today's discussion in relation to shaping future work on electrical vehicle infrastructure across Lincolnshire, as captured, are taken under consideration by officers and relevant portfolio holders. Does anyone dissent? I am seeing no dissent. Therefore, that one is agreed, and thank you for another very interesting debate on this item. We move on to item 10, which is Visitor Economy Situation 2022, Prospects for 2023, and the County Council's response. And this report can be found on pages 52 to 58 of the agenda pack and gives an update on the strategic activities that have been undertaken to support the development and resilience of the visitor economy sector. It shows substantial progress has been made to promote Greater Lincolnshire to visitors and support for the businesses to evolve to meet consumer requirements. Activity to date has focused on developing green tourism credentials, nature tourism, business skill development and investor opportunities. And the actions before us are twofold. We are invited to 1, review and comment on the current progress to date and provide input to assist officers to plan and facilitate future visitor economy interventions, and 2, support the partnership approach to developing the local visitor economy partnership for Visit England endorsement and accreditation. And that report will be presented by Mary Powell, Place and Investment Manager, who has been waiting very patiently in the chamber. Mary, over to you.
My report is sort of pretty much divided into 2 parts. First part is about support to business, to tourism businesses that we've put in place over the last 2 years. Very quickly, I'll just highlight 3 areas that I'd just like to draw to your attention. One, I don't know whether you've had the chance to look at the new videos that we've put on the Visit Lincolnshire website. Some of them are on County Council attractions, but welcome your opinions on those. Videos do bring a website to life and are considered pretty vital these days. The second thing I'd like to draw to your attention is the partnership that when we did the Coastal Bird Trail, is we worked with RSPB, Wildlife Trust, National Trust, Lincolnshire Birding Club. Incredibly, I know we've worked with a lot of these people before, but actually it was an incredibly successful partnership, and more work is coming out of this because of the success of it. And the third thing I'd like to draw to your attention is the skills training, which has been very successful. I could have put many more glowing comments from the people who've been through it. Getting businesses to engage with training can be quite challenging, and word of mouth is very important, so for the businesses to say it's good is excellent. The second part of the report is that the government is changing tourism structures. We are in the very early days. We are working with Destination Lincolnshire and other organisations in the county, but no doubt we will be bringing a further report to you as it develops. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mary. I'd now like to invite members of the committee to ask any clarifying questions or provide any comments. Councillor Griggs. Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mary, for this presentation. I do support these activities, and I've gone through the report quite a bit here on the attractions in Lincolnshire, which of course I support, including the coast. But is there any future plans to focus more on some of the events that take place across the county, often run by volunteers in our community groups? We know this year we've got the coronation coming up, and that's celebrated in many of our communities. And actually in Spalding, the Flower Parade returns after a 10-year absence. And the organiser there has worked very well with coaches up and down the country. Very successfully attracted, I believe, 30 coaches into Spalding, South Holland on that weekend, which has filled hotels, which is good for hotels and hospitality. And you've just referred to skills, and I mentioned earlier, customer service. So good customer service can lead to return visits to that particular destination. So it's just a comment, hopefully all those many local events across this county can be promoted, because it can lead to people returning to this area from outside the area, and also seeing the many benefits to return for their holidays in the future. Thank you.
Mary, would you like to comment on that?
The events is something that we've done a lot of work on this year in terms of developing an events part of the visitlincolnshire.com, which we didn't have at first, because obviously during lockdown, when we first launched the website, there weren't events anyway, so we sort of rather parked that. But we've developed that, and it is drawing big visitor numbers to the website, so it's good for us in that it's bringing the people to the website, but it just shows how important events are in bringing visitors to the county and moving them around. So it's something that we are developing, doing more on. It's working well for us, but we probably need to do more.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Griggs, I think you're next.
Yeah, thank you very much. Again, it's going back on the events thing. I vaguely remember the last time it came to committee, we talked about events. I've just had a quick look through the events list, because having young children myself, I frequently go, oh, I wonder what we can do this weekend or next weekend or whatnot. And there seems to be large swathes of Lincolnshire where no events are on the website, and I appreciate it's not an exhaustive list, but I didn't know, obviously the local district and borough councils produce events lists as well. I didn't know if there's any way we could liaise with them to potentially get those lists on the website, because I think it'd be really great in terms of people using the website if there was one place where you could go and go, okay, I'm looking at Lincolnshire generally, that's the website I'm going to go to. I think in terms of gaining traction, that would be really helpful. And as well, when you click on the different areas, and again, I appreciate that it's a visit, not a, this is the history of local places, but yeah, if we look at Boston, Sleaford, other places, while they appear on the website, I think there's, and I'm sure there's others across the county, there's lots of places where there's historical things to go look at and do that isn't necessarily Lincoln Castle, Tatchell Castle, that aren't on the website. So, and again, I appreciate that it will probably expand as time moves forward, but I didn't know, could you just sort of give us a bit of background as to what the plans are for helping people discover Lincolnshire if you're not from here and you know nothing about Sleaford? Well, why would I go to Sleaford other than the paragraph of blurb on the website? Thanks.
This is the time of the year when the events are coming in thick and fast, and I know that a huge number came in only just yesterday and are being put onto the website. So this is the kind of critical period for us of chasing all the events and making sure that we've got them all. We do sometimes have a bit of an issue about what is a tourism event and what is a kind of a local event, and we. Although the website we want to inspire and inform, we don't want too many jumble sales, and so there's a sort of a bit of weeding that we have to do to make sure that for the main consumer website of the county, that it's actually selling the right events, and that perhaps there are other places where they being rude about jumble sales, but you know what I mean, that an event isn't really a tourism event. So we have to do a bit of work of getting the right events and leading people off to to other places if we're not the appropriate place. But now is the time, and they are coming in really thick and fast. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that, Mary. Just a final question from me. In terms of who comes to our county, I mean, obviously there are some things like you go to Lincolnshire if you want to go to the coast because you want the beaches or you want the wild coast. Those are individual things, but it's interesting reading your report that there's clearly a lot of, when you talk about events, for example, there's a lot of stuff that we can do as a county council more at the granular level. And I'm interested to know how much we work with all those individual subsectors, if you will. Little hidden worlds. Aviation enthusiasts is an obvious one, which is worth a great deal of money, or cyclists, or bird watchers, or nature lovers, or whatever it might be. To what degree are we engaging directly with those sectors, and how far do you see them as having potential that we can leverage to increase the overall value of tourism to the county?
Yes, we do work with the sort of those sort of subsectors, and so aviation heritage. There are anniversaries coming up, and we've been working with them. We like to have as much notice as possible. The kind of bird thing, the bird watching, was that they came to us. The bodies that I mentioned in the report, they sort of said, we think this is good for tourism. Obviously, their interest is the actual birds themselves, and I think there's always been a bit of a conflict between the conservation bodies and us as the sort of bringing tourists in, you know, and am I bringing horrid tourists in who are going to scare all their birds away? I think now there is more a coming together of minds about that we can manage those competing things much more successfully by working together. So it's been such a successful working together, a sort of win-win from both sides, that we're now working on a sort of rivers project, which is again on a nature theme. So yes, we do. Sometimes we go to them, and sometimes they come to us. But we like those kind of themed developments because they are easier for us to package together and put on the website.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed for that. Seeing no further members, I beg your pardon, there is a further member, and it's the Vice Chairman, Councillor Griggs again.
Thank you very much. Sorry to be belligerent about particular points. I'm just having a look on the website now, so it was a faux pas on my part not to prior. On the things to do attractions in Lincolnshire page, I think it's really good. It's got some great pictures of some of the things. But again, I appreciate it's not going to be an exhaustive list, but I find it to be quite a sparse list in terms of the attractions that are available across Lincolnshire. We have a plethora of museums across the county, not just the collection at Lincoln, none of which are mentioned on the website, or at least on the page that I'm on. And I appreciate they may appear somewhere on the website, but if I'm looking for something to do, most people, and the metrics would support it, click on a website. If they don't see what they want, they click on a different website. So it needs to be really in your face in terms of what's available. Because, again, I appreciate in terms of zoos, farms and aquariums, there's a separate page. There's a separate page about the seaside, and some about historic buildings, houses and castles, but nothing in terms of other things that are available. And I think, especially as previous members alluded to, the links we have with the Air Force and the links we have with, especially if we look at the Mayfair 400 coming up, the links that Lincolnshire has with the Pilgrim Fathers and the whole America story, I think we're going to get a lot of external tourism as well as internal tourism. So we really need to be focusing the information around the sorts of tourism we may get or that we're trying to attract across Lincolnshire. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment, which I'm sure will be taken on board. Do you want very quickly to come back on that, Mary?
I mean, the website is very comprehensive, and it is very big. We're adding to it all the time. So, any particular areas that you think are missing that don't get picked up within those themes, the county is so big that you almost have to divide it up into those themes to kind of narrow it down so people can find things. But actually the feedback we get from people is that it's very easy to navigate and find things. So, but, anything that you think is missing, we will chase up.
Perhaps a conversation you can pursue, excuse me, off-grid. Well, look, thank you for that. Tourism is of enormous importance to the economy of our county and to employment, as we were discussing earlier on. So an extremely important aspect of our work. So our formal proposal, I move that the committee endorses the report and work undertaken to develop and enhance future visitor economy interventions, and I ask that our comments from today's discussion in support to the partnership approach described in the paper, as captured, are taken under consideration by officers and relevant portfolio holders. Does anyone dissent from that? I am seeing no dissent. That is therefore agreed. So thank you for that one. We now move on to agenda item 11, which is service level performance reporting against the Performance Framework 2022-2023, quarter 3. This scrutiny report is on pages 59 to 70 of the agenda pack. This report sets out the performance of the Tier 2 service level performance measures for 2022-2023, quarter 3, for economy, flooding and waste, which are within the remit of the Environment and Economy Scrutiny Committee. And the actions before us today, the committee is invited to consider and comment on the detail of performance contained in the report and recommend any changes or actions to the relevant executive members and leading officers. And the report will be presented by Samantha Harrison, Head of Economic Development, Chris Miller, Head of Environment, and Mike Reid, Head of Waste, all of whom are with us in the chamber. Samantha, would you like to lead us off?
Thank you, Chairman, certainly. So in terms of the economy measures, we have 3 targets that we are providing information on. So number of businesses supported, number of adult qualifications, and the amount of external funding that we have secured. I wanted to let you know, in terms of the business supported, we have exceeded the target, but I wanted to draw your attention to the new pie charts that have been included on page 61 through to 63. So these pie charts are actually showing now the businesses by their geography, by their priority sector and by their size. So it's a request from the last meeting that you wanted some further detail. And just to clarify, in terms of priority sectors, we've looked at the shared sectors in the economic strategy that we have rather than individual standard industry classification sectors, because there are a multitude of those. So would welcome your comments on those. In terms of the next target we have, which is number of qualifications achieved by adults, we have exceeded that target.
but we've also put in some information on the location of learners across Lincolnshire. And it's not just the ones on our qualification programme. These are the ones, the learners that have embarked on our adult skills and learning programme overall. And we've also got a number of enrolments by location. So one learner could enrol on a number of courses. So we just thought to give you extra colour about the information. And then our final target is the amount of external funded attracted to Lincolnshire. We're behind target on this. Due to phasing of government grants. So whilst we have secured funding, the funding packages are over a number of years, so they're coming in different tranches. So we will be behind, and we are behind this time, but we will also be behind in Q4. Very happy to open up for questions.
Thank you very much indeed for that summary. Members. Well, I appreciate members' keenness to ensure that we run to time, but we are allowed to ask questions. That is why we're here. I'll put one. The very beginning of my term on this council, one of the reports in this context alluded to funding for our work with businesses and business interventions and what would replace European funding as that began to wind down. And it didn't just stop. There's a taper. I wondered where we stood at the moment in regard to that, and whether you see funding and resources being a limiting factor on our ability to interface with and assist businesses going forward.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So previously we had £8 million of European funding that helped us deliver our business support programme. In terms of our bids for UK Shared Prosperity Fund, we've asked for £1.7 million across the 10 local authorities across Greater Lincolnshire. To date, we have been successful in with securing funding from West Lindsey, Lincoln City, Rutland. We've got expressions of interest in with North and North East Lincolnshire and the South East Lincolnshire Partnership. I'm presenting to South Stevens UK Shared Prosperity Fund Board this afternoon in terms of their funding, and we've got open discussions with North Stevens. So it's moving forward is a positive picture currently, but we haven't. There is going to be another 4 to 6 weeks before we've got a final approval of the other programmes. So at the next scrutiny committee, I'll be able to give you a full picture. However, it will be a much reduced service than what we've been used to.
Thank you very much for that. That's very helpful, and we look forward to a further report. And by the way, if no other members are commenting on it, I think the pie charts are very helpful. Councillor Briggs.
Thank you very much. Councillor Carrington's just stole my thunder a little bit. I was going to talk about the pie charts and the graphs specifically. I think that they're really, really useful. And they answered a lot of questions, but they also raised a few more. For example, bear with me, I've lost the pie chart I was looking for. Yeah, when we're talking by businesses by priority sectors, we've got 52.56% as other businesses. And I do apologise if it's mentioned in the text, but I couldn't see it. I think potentially next time a bit more of a breakdown of what that might include when it's over half of the businesses might be useful for members. But again, I do really appreciate the fact that you've put them in, because I think for myself personally, it was quite eye-opening. And also the businesses assisted by location, and I'm trying not to be protectionist, but I can't help but notice that Boston, despite being the second largest centre of population, doesn't feature at all on that pie chart that I can see. Correct me if I'm wrong. And if that's the case, could we potentially have some detail as to why that is? Is it that no particular businesses there at that point needed support, or is it that potentially we don't advertise the support across the county as well as we could do? So yeah, any feedback on that would be great. Thank you very much. But again, I do appreciate it.
Thank you. I think that in terms of that one, what happened initially was we'd put South East Lincolnshire Partnership Group all together, and when they've been disaggregated, Boston has come off the list. So it will be rectified for the next meeting. Apologies.
Thank you very much. Do we have any further questions for Samantha before we move on? We don't. In that case, thank you very much indeed for that update. And as I think there's general agreement, certainly at this end of the room, that the presentation is very helpful in terms of those pie charts. So we move on now to Chris Miller, Head of Environment. Chris.
Thank you, Chairman. So looking at page 66 in your report now on the flooding measure, which, as you are aware, is a contextual measure and isn't a specific target. So for quarter 3 of 2022-23, we saw 20 Section 19 investigations commenced across 23 properties, so where we've had ingress of floodwater. And comparatively for 2021-22, that number was 5 commenced, affecting 10. And brief as it is, that is the report, Chairman. Thank you.
Question from me. Everybody is saying it's been a much drier winter, yet we're up in terms, if I'm reading the numbers correctly, in terms of Section 19s?
Reflective of the storms in August, Chairman.
Historical data. Thank you for that clarification. Any questions for Chris from members? Seeing none, I will move on. Thank you very much, Chris. To Mike Reid, Head of Waste.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. In terms of waste performance, we've put some information to give a bit more context about why and how we measure waste statistics. So the information is in there regarding the waste hierarchy, and this is the methodology by which we must treat. We have a statutory obligation to measure and treat waste in this way, and the highest priority is minimisation, it's prevention, and there's a sliding scale with disposal at the very bottom. So I mentioned this just to give some context because and talk about where our 4 KPIs fit into this hierarchy. So first of all, at the top we have the amount of household waste collected per population, which is reducing. It's still lower than the target, which is the highest priority on the waste hierarchy, and that's something which is obviously very good, and we seek to kind of encourage minimisation as much as possible. At the bottom end of the scale, I'll talk about the landfill, the amount of waste material that we have going to landfill. That's obviously very damaging to the environment. It produces lots of methane and carbon dioxide indefinitely, which can sit in landfill sites and just decompose over many, many years. So having another indicator which shows that we are performing below that target is obviously a good picture to promote. In between, we have the 2 recycling rates. Now, this is the overall recycling rate and the household waste recycling centre recycling rates. Now, recycling rates are a little bit more complex than the 2 KPIs that I've just mentioned because they don't always reflect the actual objectives of the hierarchy. So what occurs and what's occurred this quarter, which I'll go into in a moment, is that you can have a situation where you can have better performance in terms of waste minimisation, but that can be reflected in a lower recycling rate. And this is a perfect opportunity just to mention this in terms of the amount of garden waste that we've had produced in the last quarter. Due to the very hot summer last year, we had approximately 8,000 tonnes less of garden waste being presented to us, which is excellent. And if you think about the waste hierarchy, that's minimisation, which is the highest priority. So that's 8,000 less tonnes of material, which has to be taken somewhere and disposed of at cost financially and environmentally. However, the consequence of having 8,000 tonnes less of garden waste, which is recycling material, is that the recycling rate has gone down by approximately 1%. So this kind of shows the complexity of all these figures, and we're not always comparing like for like. So it's just understanding that there are nuances to this. The recycling rate is something that we have to report on, but it's not the be all and end all. And I think we do need to try and promote more waste minimisation because that is actually where the real targets can be. And recycling rates are good to monitor and keep an eye on, but ultimately it may not reflect our ultimate objectives. However, saying that, in future we will be looking at, and this has been mandated now, we'll be looking at having separate collection of food waste, which that will take food material out of the residual waste stream, and that will give us a saving on recycling rates as well, which could be we estimate over 7%. So that's in diversion from energy recovery to recycling, which is referring back to the waste hierarchy. That material, which is approximately 30,000 tonnes, if we shift that within the hierarchy, we will get better recycling performance. And this is just kind of demonstrating where we're at, but ultimately I think we're in a good position in terms of waste, and now we've got some serious targets to try and achieve with regards to food waste collection and disposal in the next 2 years. So I'll conclude there, Chairman, and just open it up to questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Mike. I would just share with colleagues that we went through this in some detail at the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board last week. And I have to say that I found it particularly helpful to have and you can find it in the graphic on page 67, the inverted pyramid setting out the waste hierarchy, because we often focus exclusively and in isolation on recycling rates. And it's right that those are very important. But as Mike has very eloquently explained, you can't treat them in isolation. They have to be looked and represent a challenge, and we need to improve them and all of that. But in the context of the waste hierarchy of that triangle, not completely in isolation. So, members, over to you for questions. Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's awful. I think that we used to have a recycling rate in Lincolnshire of over 50%, and now it appears that we're down to barely 40 and falling. I understand the recent factors around the dry summer and the cost of living crisis and so on have an effect on the amount of waste presented. However, we still should be increasing rather than decreasing the amount that we recycle. Part of the problem is contamination, I believe, and I'd be interested to see or to hear whether or not contamination of, in our case, silver bins or recycling contamination at the household collection level is improving or getting worse by district. But the Lincolnshire Waste Partnership, which is supposed to ensure a coordinated approach for this between the disposal authorities and the collection authorities, hasn't met since July and isn't going to meet until next month. So at least we should be talking to each other, especially when we're bringing in new schemes like the paper and card scheme, which is most welcome. But I would have thought the paper and card scheme and the reduction in contamination resulting from that would have seen an increase in the amount of recycling. Also the food waste scheme, which Mr. Reid says is coming on, until recently we did have a food waste scheme in South Kesteven, but there was no money to pay for it. So I ask the same question that I ask seemingly every time: when will we know what the financial impact of the Environment Act will be, and when will we know how much new burdens funding will be allocated to us, and will it be enough?
Before going back to Mike, I think the last one I can probably answer, and I stand to be corrected by officers. When will we know? We will know when the government tells us, because they haven't filled in the details of that part of the Environment Act. And it is a fundamental problem. Central governments of all stripes in the last 20 years have moved away from the old system where an act was a complete thing in itself, and effectively when they pass an act called the Environment Act or anything else, it's kind of a framework. They then come along and fill in through statutory instruments the detail. Until we see that detail, we don't know the costs, and obviously they can't say how much support will be given, or whether they're just going to dump it on local authorities. So on that one, we're kind of in other people's hands. But Mike, do you want to pick up the points that Councillor Baxter has raised?
I certainly can, and just referring to the last question first, DEFRA have recently announced within the last 2 weeks that we have the mandate now to have separate collection and disposal of food waste from the end of March 2025, which is just over 2 years away. So we've got some very challenging targets to overcome with our infrastructure, and also district councils will have in purchasing fleets to actually collect and help haul this material around. So there is more detail coming through from DEFRA. That's a deadline that we're pretty much sticking to now. And one thing that they have stated is that in terms of two-tier authorities, new burden funding will only be available to waste collection authorities. So the waste disposal authorities will be expected to meet any capital or revenue requirements, funding, from any savings that they can make from moving the material within the waste hierarchy. So essentially what they're trying to say is any savings you create from not incinerating that food waste, that will help to reimburse you for the infrastructure costs of moving it to a cheaper disposal outlet. So they've at least started kind of commenting and giving us some feedback, but it is part of an ongoing discussion with DEFRA, and it is a little bit disappointing that they put this marker down without having a full discussion with all authorities, and it's quite alarming the amount of pressure that we've all got now to actually deliver on this. Just coming back to the point on contamination, there is a real improvement in contamination rates where we have separate collection of materials. So where the paper and card is coming out of the mixed dry recyclate bin, we have an improvement in contamination, which is helping the overall rates. We're also finding that the material which is left in the mixed dry recyclate, that is better as a consequence. And it kind of helps to demonstrate the worthiness and the value of having separate collections. And food is one of the worst contaminants that we have in our waste material. So this is why if we take food waste out of the general black bin, residual bin, there should be an improvement on the other waste streams that we have. So I think we have got cause for optimism, but in terms of recycling rates and where we've come from in the last 10, 15 years, I think we've got to be very mindful that we're not always measuring like for like. The service is improving, things are cleaning up. However, we're measuring things with a lot stricter standards now. And one thing to bear in mind is that we're actually presented with a material. So a lot of this is down to the public and the public choice about what they throw in their bins or present at a household waste recycling centre. There's not a great deal of control that we have as a disposal authority to dictate to the public what we will accept. And if the public choose not to recycle, that's very difficult for us to control. We can try and influence through education, engagement, but ultimately it's a public choice. So there's certain things that we can't over control. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I think we have the portfolio with us. The portfolio holder with us. I beg your pardon, Councillor McNally.
Thank you, Chair. I think really Mike's picked most of the things up. It is very difficult to control what people put in the bin, and the measurements that are taken ultimately are what people throw away. So if people throw away that as the normal waste and that as the recycling, I can't make that any heavier to get the percentage up. It's just, the only thing is like the food waste that might come out that black bin might increase it. In terms of the contamination rates, there was roughly about 31% before the paper and card trial started. The communications went out throughout the whole, even the districts that wasn't participating in that specific rollout. We have seen a decrease in the contamination to about roughly 27–28%, and in the areas that we've had the paper and card, the contamination is roughly between 14% to 16%. So it has drastically improved. Still more to be done, but it is very difficult when, like Mike said, you can't control what people are throwing away.
Yeah, thank you for that. Just picking up on my district area, which is North Kesteven, where we relatively recently introduced what for us are purple lidded bins, in other words, paper and card recycling. Those streams are now amongst the best in the county, and they're running, I believe, at around 99% pure, so effectively you're not going to get anything better. There was a dip in mixed dry recycling, and that is now being clawed back, and those figures are improving. And I think whenever we make a significant change, there's going to be an element of people getting used to it. You know, it's the same for all of us. Even if you've been drilled in this stuff or part of the part of the process of bringing these measures in, you've got to get used to what is right to put it into your bin, and, oh no, should it be that one, should it be this one? But those are improving, certainly, once we're in my district area, improving very significantly, which is good news. Councillor Linderwood.
Thank you, Chairman. I wonder if on page 67, Mike, you could explain to me what reused means, because first of all, I read it as it aimed at us as individual residents, taking things to charity shops, etc. Then further down, I read, in Lincolnshire, we were planning to introduce a reuse process at household waste recycling centres. Is this something like I've seen in Luton in Bedfordshire, where they've sort of created their own, I could class it as like their own charity shop? Is this something we are planning to do, where we can reuse things that are relatively good, somebody else can utilise? Thank you, Chairman.
Mike.
It is indeed. Excuse me. It's all of the above. So it's anything which you might consider throwing away. If you can pass that on or find another purpose for it, then that's essentially what reuse is. In Lincolnshire, we are looking at introducing a reuse facility at Tattershall Household Waste Recycling Centre in partnership with the Air Ambulance. It's something that we've been kind of very eager to do in the last few months. We're just waiting on the final kind of memorandum of understanding with that organisation, but we have the ability on the site to do it, and that's on a trial basis, which will then hopefully give us the data and the experience to look at rolling it out potentially at the other 10 recycling centres. And it's something that we will be coming back to the committee in the future to discuss, but because I think there's a real opportunity in potentially creating an income source so that people can go and buy products on sites which could not ordinarily go into the recycling bins or the residual bin for incineration. So if people can go and buy that, there is a potential salvage value there. But also what that represents is a diversion from a disposal element. So if someone takes something to a site, a wooden chair, for example, rather than throw that into a bin, which then has to be hauled away and recycled or incinerated, you're diverting that cost entirely. So you're instantly getting away from the haulage cost and then the disposal cost. And it's repurposing something which has got real value. And it's ultimately about saving resources, protecting existing resources, and not essentially burning something and then having to recreate a chair, for example. So it's something that I think a lot of authorities around the country have been doing in the last year, and we are looking to learn from them and our trial at Tattershall just to see how successful this could be. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Kelly.
So, Mike, this is Lincoln's answer to the repair shop. It's upcycling, isn't it?
Potentially, yes.
Yeah. Is that what you're...
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Sorry, I was just trying to add a bit of humour into this.
Yeah, no, I didn't get the repair shop reference straight away. I apologise, but I've got it now. Thank you.
Don't worry, Councillor Kelly, it'll go better second, Has. Right. I'm not seeing any further interventions from the floor, therefore we will move on. Thank you very much indeed for those questions and comments on all of those three reports from our officers. The formal bit, I move that the committee endorses the report or reports and is satisfied with the performance achieved to date and the assurances provided were targets I'm struggling with the wording of this, and the assurances provided were targets were not achieved is what it says. I think assurances were provided where targets were not achieved. And I ask that our comments from today's discussion are passed on to the relevant Executive Councillor, one of whom of course has been with us, for consideration as recorded. Does anyone dissent from that? I'm seeing no dissent, and therefore that matter is agreed, and we may move on in this very long agenda to item 12, which is the Thedlethorpe Geological Disposal Facility Working Group interim update. We're now going to receive an interim verbal update from Justin Brown, Assistant Director Growth, on the workings of the Thedlethorpe Geological Disposal Facility Working Group so far. Justin.
Chairman, thank you, and I am bringing a full report to the next meeting. So in terms of the what's actually called community partnership, not working group, that has now been formed. It's met 3 or 4 times. As you know, Councillor Hill represents LCC on it. It's facilitated a number of community events in order to inform and listen to the local community. It started to establish its grant fund programme, and it's starting to do some work on a community vision. So I'll be able to explain a lot more about the community partnership and also about other interests in the site at our next meeting. But that's probably a fair summary of where things are at. There is a website which is called Thedlethorpe Working in Partnership, which provides further detail on the work of the partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Before opening it to members, I think it would be helpful if we could, via our officers, just circulate that website detail. Could you remind us, before we go to the floor, the time scale that the working group is going to be working on or in?
So ultimately, one of the roles of the partnership is to provide information or ensure information is provided to inform a public vote. Now, at the moment, that public vote the timing of it will be determined by things like geological and technical advice, things like community advice, and things like government policy. So it's not something that I can give you a date on, but it is something which is certainly not imminent. There is a lot of work because this is a very, very complex scheme. And as I intimated earlier, it is not the only scheme which is being seen for that property.
Yes, thank you for that. It is worth just stating for the record the context of this. We are not at the County Council, or indeed in this committee, the decision makers. The decision makers will be people local to the area of the site. And this County Council took the decision to join the working group to help facilitate asking the questions, including the toughest of questions, providing resources to help those local people to ask questions. So, do we have any questions here from the floor? Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chairman. I think you've just told me the answer to one of my questions, which is when and by whom. And you say it's not in the immediate future. Are we talking 2025, 2027? Secondly, what is the gist of the feedback so far from the public information events or consultation events? Has it been broadly positive, or has it been broadly sceptical? And thirdly, is this the favoured option of, I can't remember the name of the people, is it GWF, GDF? Because I saw the same logo on a double-page ad in 2 editions of the Lynn News and the Lynn News it's called now. It stopped being the Advertiser in about 1980. But the Lynn News, which serves Kings Lynn and West Norfolk, is currently featuring double-page spreads saying to that community, would you like some nuclear waste and the associated benefits in your area? So any feedback on any of that?
Yeah, thank you. So, apologies, I thought I was doing a verbal report that wasn't a debate, but in terms of some immediate feedback, Nuclear Waste Services, which is the organisation, have held a number of drop-in events in which the community has asked a lot of questions. There are some people who are very uncomfortable with the proposal. There are some people who are saying it could deliver benefits, and therefore one of the reasons that we are keen to be a part of the partnership is to ensure that both sides of that spectrum are provided with the correct advice. Nuclear Waste Services are working on a facility that will be for the UK, and therefore they will inevitably be looking at other locations in the same way as I say, there are other organisations who are looking at Thedlethorpe as well. It's owned by National Grid, they're working with others. So this is a fluid situation, and I guess from our perspective, it's important that we explore, as we would with any inward investment, that we explore the opportunities that there are for the locality, that we ensure that we understand any risks to the locality and that they're properly communicated. And I can bring some wider information when I come back in April.
Thank you very much indeed for that. I'm sorry you were taken by surprise by the questions, but it was down on our running order as questions, but purely on a verbal report. And we look forward to a more detailed report when it comes through. Again, I would remind members that the timing of the work group is down to the work group. It is not down to us. And the point when there is new information to communicate does not necessarily coincide with the meeting cycle of this committee. I'm just looking around the room to see if any other member wishes to make a contribution. I see none. Therefore, I will move to the formal proposal, which is just simply that the committee receives this verbal update and requests that our comments from today's discussion are captured and taken under consideration by officers responsible for representation to the working group. Does anyone dissent from that? I see no dissent. That matter is therefore agreed. So we now move to the penultimate item on the agenda, apart from the ending, which is the committee work programme. This item is on pages 70 to 76 of the agenda pack, and it enables the committee to comment on the contents of our work programme, and the report will be presented by Chiara, our scrutiny officer. Our actions on this are to review the work programme and highlight any additional scrutiny activity which could be included for consideration in the work programme. Chiara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would like to begin with a reminder to all members of the Environment and Economy Scrutiny Committee that the work programme is a living document that is being reviewed at each meeting of the committee to ensure that its contents are still relevant and will add value to the work of the Council and partners. Members taking ownership of your own works of the year, you are encouraged to bring forward important items of community interest to the committee, whilst recognising that not all items will be taken up depending on available resource and relevance. Moving on, in our next meeting, the agenda that has been developed to date will include the Business Premises Portfolio Performance Report, a written update on the Thedlethorpe Geological Disposal Facility Working Group, waste engagement initiatives, a report on energy options analysis for Greater Lincolnshire, that is an interim report, an update to paper and card waste collection project, and lastly, the Motorhomes and Campervans Working Group outcomes and recommendations. In relation to the latter, I would like to add a caveat and inform members that as the membership of this working group is now being established, and the inaugural meeting has been agreed and is actually in fact next week on the 8th of March, I will be in position to confirm the time frame for delivery in the coming weeks, and therefore I would like to note that this item may be required to be rolled over to the committee's May meeting. Finally, I would like to take your attention to the agendas from September 2023 onwards, and going back to my earlier reminder and plea for members' contributions to the work programme, in conjunction with the existing list of items to be programmed that is laid out on pages 74 and to 75 of the report. I welcome members' and officers' views and suggestions of items to be considered as meat to the bones of your future agendas. This concludes my update to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cara. Do any members have any comment which they wish to make at this stage? If not, do please always remember, as Cara said, this is a living document. We're very proud of the thoroughness of our scrutiny here at Lincolnshire County Council, and if you do have any ideas which you would wish to be pursued, as and when they occur to you, please let our officers and me know, and we'll look at putting those on the work programme. So, formally, our last proposal of the day, I move that we note the report and approve the existing work programme as detailed on pages 70 to 76. Does anyone dissent? I see no dissent. That matter is agreed. Colleagues, the last item in your pack is entitled Energy for Growth, Utilities Provision in Greater Lincolnshire Update. That is an interim report for members' information only. As we've heard, more details are on their way. Any comments in relation to that should be raised directly with Joanna Rhodes, the Project Officer Utilities, or with Mick King, who's Head of Economic Infrastructure. That now concludes at just gone 22 to this very full meeting. Can I thank everyone, all members and all officers for your contributions to a very, very full meeting this morning, and the meeting is now closed. Thank you very much.